Good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining me on a beautiful Friday evening. Could be a Saturday morning for some of you already. Yeah, this has been an awesome day. Not sure if everybody saw, but Fractal Audio, who I've been a longtime user of their products, had I think the very first Axe-FX, Axe-FX II, all the various iterations. Now I'm on the Axe-FX III. But they sent out a preset today that I sent them as part of their gift of tone, which is kind of like their December. They started it last year, and then they've been doing it a little bit this year as well. So awesome. Glad you're digging the preset. If you haven't, go to Fractal Audio. I can't remember what the subdomain is, but I'm sure you'll find it on their site. Check it out. We're going to be digging into that a little bit tonight. As you guys already know, tonight's topic is amp modelers. And so I was actually going to do this video anyways, right after Christmas. And then when Fractal said that they wanted a preset to send out, I was like, let's do this now. So here we are. Here we are. So amp modeling is kind of a little bit of a interesting topic. For some reason, it's controversial, and I get it. I own a lot of big, expensive amps that I really don't want to believe can be replaced with, like, you know, $300 box or a $99 plug-in or whatever else. But what I really want to stress tonight is not the difference between a modeler and an amp or trying to make them the same, but more or less highlight what a modeler is good for, what maybe some people think it's not good for, and maybe like just test some of those maybe misconceptions a little bit. I consider myself to be pretty objective, and so I try very hard not to get swayed by, oh, I just spent this much money, or, oh, my favorite guitar player uses this, or my favorite producer uses this, or somebody said this about this. I try to just kind of cut out the noise. And so I've done a lot of A-Bing, blind A-Bing, and my conclusions, are sometimes, like I said, maybe a little bit, not what people want to hear. But basically, as you probably guess, I've come to the conclusions that modelers are pretty fucking awesome. And so today we're going to kind of go into how I came to that conclusion and maybe give you guys a little insight as to how I use modelers. And yeah. So all that being said, please hit the subscribe button if you're not already subscribed to the channel. I am really enjoying doing these live streams, and I'm going to keep on doing more and more. The more that you guys watch, the more I'll prioritize them in my busy schedule. But I do love doing them. The other thing, I've got a few DMs from people wanting to start up a Discord group that we can continue these conversations, or we can have other conversations that are maybe a little bit more interactive. It's not just me sitting here talking to a screen and a camera. So I'm not really familiar with how to do that. I'm sure it's probably not that difficult. But that will be in the horizon as well. Maybe that will be something that I do over the holidays, is get that fired up. So keep your eyes out for that. What other housekeeping can we take care of now? Oh, if you already haven't been to my website, did a little, not a revamp, just added a few things to the website. ChrisBaseford.com. If you go all the way to the bottom, there's a little email entry for your name and your email address. If you sign up on my website, you'll be part of my mailing list that I'm going to be sending out exclusive content. And at first, it's probably going to be kind of slow, I'll be honest with you. But my plan is to, every month, depending on what I'm working on, depending on kind of what the topics seem to be, the people seem to be the most interested in, that could be anything from guitar presets, guitar modeler presets, drum samples, session templates, plugin settings, like all stuff that people seem to like these days. So make sure you go to my website and make sure you let me know who you are and how I get in touch with you. And actually, tonight, what I'll probably do is we're going to be building a couple presets, or going through a few presets in the Axe-FX. I'll probably just post some of those, or not post them, but send them out to anybody who's on the mailing list. So go over there. I promise not to spam you uncontrollably with useless shit. I will try to make it fun stuff that you guys will hopefully actually use and enjoy. So here we go. I'm going to give you a quick history of where amp modeling started in my world. To back up, like way far back. When I was a kid, I played guitar, like early teens, kind of. I think I started playing when I was like 12, 13-ish. Played in bands. Obviously, when you're that old, you just get whatever shitty amp, either somebody else was offloading because they don't want it anymore, or, whatever's on sale. There's however we get our first pieces of gear. My first amp was a tiny little PV Rage 158. And it was awesome because all my friends had like the Fender version, which was like this little 15-inch Squire practice amp. But the PV had a second channel, it had a distortion channel that was actually pretty cool. And so all of my friends who had this little Squire, they just had a single channel, and like even when you'd crank it up or put a distortion pedal on it, it wouldn't get as gnarly as this little tiny PV amp. I wish I still had that thing. So that's what I started with. Then I went to, I don't know, whatever Fender. Just at that point, you just want louder. And so I eventually saved up some money from part-time jobs, got whatever Fender it was, Princeton, whatever. Did not have a cool distortion. Had to get a distortion pedal. And that's shit got really like deep for me. I started going down the rabbit hole of distortion pedals, and I was like just trying to find the heaviest, like just crunchiest, everything that I could find. I ended up I ended up finding and absolutely loving the Boss Metal Zone. That was my jam for like 5 years. So ultimately then it just became about getting louder amps. Then I got a Marshall Valve State half stack, which was fucking awesome. Again, didn't know what I had. I wish I still had that thing. And then I traded that in for a JCM 900, and I was like, I'm probably like 16 or 17 by now. Long story short, a lot of my favorite albums actually didn't use like Marshall JCMs and a Metal Zone. At the time, like Metallica, Motley Crue, those are probably the two big ones for me, and they still are. But I was always chasing those tones with like the total complete wrong tools. And unfortunately, the internet wasn't around back then the way it is now. Like, you can go and search everybody's rig and be like, okay, what are the settings for Mick Mars's Soldano? Like, I didn't even know what the fuck a Soldano was back then. And so I was always tone chasing and never really getting exactly what I wanted because I really wasn't using the proper tools. And if anybody's my age or older, we used to look at guitar magazines. And an ad popped up in a guitar magazine, hook, line, and sinker. It was, and I'm going to pull it up here. Let me go into here. I'm going to pull this up here. I just gave away what amp it was. Okay, check this ad out. By the way, I also have to say, lived in Canada. I grew up just outside of Toronto, and for some reason back then, now you can kind of get whatever you want wherever you want, but back then, I'd never even seen a triple rectifier. Like, I used to go to the music stores like for fun once a month or every 2 weeks. Me and my friends would go downtown Toronto to Steve's Music or Long and McQuaid or some of the kind of like the secondhand guitar stores. I'd never even heard, like, I'd kind of heard of a rectifier, kind of heard of a Mesa Boogie, but never seen one in person. Whereas now they're kind of everywhere, right? And then you start reading about, the Mesas. And then I started realizing, I'm like, oh shit, like this kind of like clangy Marshall thing with the distortion pedal is not what I'm looking for. Anyways, I was going through a guitar magazine and I came across this ad. And it says, we're creating a monster. And if you see the ad, it's kind of like a collage. Well, it's basically not a collage. It looks like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 amps that are just like completely stitched together. Okay, so if you look over here, you can kind of see the corner of a Roland JC120, which is famously, I mean, a lot of people used them, but that's kind of the famous Metallica clean sound. So it's like me being a Metallica junkie. I'm like, oh shit, I can get that sound too. That was the other thing. With my clean sound, I had to have a Boss graphic EQ pedal that was just carving the shit out of it in order to get anything, and a Boss chorus pedal. So I was doing this like 3-pedal dance. Every time I would go from distorted to clean, I had to turn off the metal zone and turn on the Boss EQ and the Boss. I think it was like a CE. Can't remember what chorus it was. It wasn't the CE2. It was the one with 4 knobs. Maybe it was a CE4. Anyways, so it was just a gong show. Like it didn't work. I mean, we made it work, and that's what was fun. But I saw this, and I'm like, shit. Okay, there's a JC120. This is that like elusive Mesa rectifier thing that I've been hearing about that now was starting to become popular. It was kind of like, mid 90s at that point, maybe late 90s. And then obviously there's a Marshall here, and it's like, okay, well, that's what I have. Didn't know what the hell this thing was, although I do now, and I actually own a DC-30. I recognize the Vox grill here, and then obviously the Fender Tweed. And anyways, man, what an advertising campaign. This thing got me. This thing absolutely got me. I'm like, there's an amp out there that can give me like all of these sounds. Like, that's insane. And so here we go. Trip to Steve's Music. And this is what I found. Man, it must have taken a while for them to get this here. Let me go back to that one. So this is I believe this was the first Line 6 amp. So the AX2 or Axis, or I think they called it an Axis, but AX2, 212, maybe the first one was Axis and this was the second one. Doesn't matter. Long story short, I went and played this thing at the store, and at like bedroom levels, just quickly scrolling through like just what we now refer to as presets, like that word kind of didn't really exist in everybody's vernacular. Man, I was fucking sold. I was like, holy shit, this thing sounds like a rectifier. Like, I didn't know what a rectifier was, but I'm like, this thing sounds like Metallica. And it was so easy. And then I turned the knob one click over, and I'm like, wow, this sounds like Guns N' Roses. Then I click it over one. And obviously I was like 16-year-old kid. My ear wasn't really that developed to where I was really getting the kind of granulars of, the first generation of amp modeling. But that just reinforces the point of kind of where amp modeling started and why it is now where it is. Maybe it wasn't exactly the sound of a rectifier, but it was way more of a rectifier than anything I had had up to that point. And I had only been using tube amps, obviously solid state amps. I'd probably gone through 6 different distortion pedals. I had graphic EQ. Like, I had analog gear. And this thing got me way, 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 way closer to the sound of Metallica than any tube amp, anything, because it was based off of the amp that I wanted it to sound like. And not only that, I got, 10 other amps in there, like the Matchless. Like, I didn't know what a Matchless was. And it wasn't the DC-30. I think it was the Chieftain, I think. But ultimately, to me, it was just like no brainer. And I hate to say it because it was probably a really bad fucking trade. But I traded my JCM 900 half stack in for a Line 6 combo. Then they gave me an almost even trade. Like, I don't think I had to pay anything. Maybe they actually gave me a little bit of money because somebody wanted the JCM 900. But man, like, it was, like I said, it was close enough. It gave me the feeling of a rectifier. It gave me the feeling of a a Fender Tweed. It gave me the feeling of a JC120. It was reminiscent enough to where it was closer than I was going to get, only having one amp. And not many 16, 17-year-old kids have like 4 amps with an amp switcher. That's not realistic. Most adults who have full-time jobs and have money to spend probably don't even have that. So, like I said, I was sold very early on. And so now we are, let's fast forward a couple of years. I ended up getting the Line6. I think it was called like a Flex. Yes, it was Flex Tone. I still have the Flex Tone. It's in storage. There's the Flex Tone. There was, what else was there? The Flex Tone. I ended up getting, Boss had like they eventually did one where they were doing like the Cosm modeling or whatever that was. It was like a little rack effect, a rack unit. I ended up getting that thing. I mean, I tried everything. Anytime something new would come out, that little Vox floorboard thing with the tube, the light bulb, all of it was like, I thought it all sounded pretty good. And so I wasn't a purist. I was blown away by the fact that I could get sounds that sounded like the records that I was listening to that at that time were getting me into music production. This is when I started getting, yes, I do remember the Johnson Millennium modeling amp. I tried that one as well. So that one was great too. Yamaha had one that was really good. I mean, I already had the Line 6s at the time. I was always looking for something better. So I was always going back to the store and putting, taking my, if they didn't have the Line 6, I'd take the Line 6. I put it right next to it. I was swapping out speakers in the Line 6 because the speaker was kind of a very just like flat kind of, it was more of like I don't know, not a PA speaker, but it was just kind of like a full range. And I was putting like, I think when I ended up settling on what's probably in my Flex Tone that I haven't turned on in probably 15 or 20 years, I think it's a classic Lead 80 that I ended up I really, really like the sound of that through that whole thing. Anyways, long story short, I mean, there is no such thing as a short story with me. They all turn into long stories. But long story, not quite as long, is ever since then, like I bought into modeling. And I bought into it not from a sense of, I think it's superior, I think it's great because it's better than an amp. Now I don't need to buy amps anymore. Now amps suck. Like, it's none of that. It's another tool for us, right? This is another tool that is accessible. It's flexible. The workflow is extremely, it can facilitate, like the creativity that an amp modeler can facilitate is way beyond what a guitar amp and speaker and mic pre and all that type of stuff. We'll get to that because I'm going to show you guys something that once you get to the impulse responses, a lot of the developers are now trying to make like the impulse response realistic to miking a cab, which is awesome because it makes it really easy to do. And we'll get into the Dynacabs that Fractal has implemented. But ultimately, like tweaking an IR the way you would tweak a real amp, nobody tweaked real amps that way. You'd go and move the mic a little bit, but you'd be hearing the amp roaring through your headphones, and you'd have an assistant, if you're lucky enough to work in a studio with an assistant, moving the mic around, or if you got one of those little robots. But the way you can switch between IRs instantaneously, you can't do that with a real amp. So what we're going to get into tonight is like comparing a real amp with a Fractal or a plug-in or a Quad Cortex or whatever else you want. I don't want to say it's not apples to apples. There is a way to compare it apples to apples, which we will talk about. But ultimately, it's like, it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. All that matters is that you have an interface that you like. You've got tools that you know how to use that are at your disposal when you want to be creative, when you want to be, if you're doing this for a living, getting paid to provide a service and being able to do it quickly and efficiently and effectively. How you get there, it really doesn't matter. So I love that everybody's firing up some questions. I'm going to jump to the chat really quickly here and answer a couple of them or just a couple comments here. Oh, by the way, if you're not subscribed, I don't think they'll let you, YouTube, I've got a setting to keep up the riffraff. You got to subscribe in order to be able to participate in the chat here. So let me go to the chat. Excuse me for looking down here. Okay. Yeah, PV Bandit. Nice. Yeah, I think I was looking at the PV Bandit when the 112 when I ended up with the Fender. The NAM open source modeler. I haven't tried that one yet. Digitech R80. Oh yeah. That was a really cool one. I remember that. I always wanted one of those massive Digitech like multi-effects boards. There was like the best guitar player in my high school had one, and whenever you'd go to like Battle of the Bands or what do they call them? Coffee houses? Coffee house? Why does that term sound so bizarre? But that's kind of like where bands would go play, I guess. Yeah, I think it was the RP something. Or the 2112, I don't know, something like that. Somebody says, I'm in Canada. It's still not great getting gear. Yeah, it's weird. It's weird, man. I mean, I'm in Canada right now. Obviously, I was in LA for the previous 20 years, which was like is Disneyland for any of this stuff. But, oh, nice. AX212 was my first modeler. I had no idea what I was doing. Neither did I. But that was the cool thing. You would just, like I said, you would turn one knob, and I'm like, that's way closer to Metallica than the last 5 years of me trading in amps and buying new distortion pedals every 4 months. So it was pretty cool. Fractal Audio, welcome. Welcome, welcome, welcome. GP16, GP100, yep. Yeah, the Roland's. I mean, even some of the Roland synth stuff. I remember I had a friend in high school whose dad was a very famous, successful musician that you would all know. I won't say who it is, but and I remember going to see. I was probably 16, maybe 15. I remember going over to her house, and she's like, "Oh, do you want to see my dad's studio?" And we went in and saw the studio, and he had one of the Roland V synth things. This is like mid 90s. And then I started going down that road once I kind of could kind of start digging into what that thing was. I mean, it's all awesome stuff. Rocktron Chameleon, yep, that was a good one too. Oh man, yeah. There's lots of Line6 Spider. I mean, okay, so the pod. Okay, so now let's fast forward a little bit. Now I'm starting to work in studios. And basically, like I mentioned, the Line6 Flex Tone. That's basically like the pod, but in an amp. Fractal. Where's the Axe-FX plugin? Yeah. Well, it's interesting that the Axe-FX. I mean, the Axe-FX would in a plugin form would probably be a beast. When I say a beast from CPU, I mean I'm sure it's possible to do, but I can't imagine that would be a very resource friendly. And the other thing that I do want to talk about when we get to when we start kind of digging into some of the modeler stuff, there is a consideration to be made for hardware versus software. And there's scenarios when I find I'm going for hardware, and there's scenarios when I'm going for software. And I'm very aware of why, and I'm very strategic as to why. And so I think there are good things about using a piece of hardware modeler, even if there's a software equivalent, using the piece of hardware and almost treating it as if it's just not a real amp, but like an amp, to where once it's recorded and once it's in, like that's your sound. There's something that forces you to commit, where a plugin, I mean, I have to be super disciplined and not just tweak for days. Sometimes you'll track something, you'll be like, this sounds awesome, and then after you've tracked it, you start kind of doing a rough mix, and an hour later, you're like, what the fuck have I been doing, just demolishing this sound that I was so happy with, inspired to track with, and now I've spent an hour just fucking with it, and probably not any better. So, what else we got in the chat here? Okay. The handheld Korg Pandora, the little Pandora. Who did I work with? I worked with somebody probably 10 years ago who still used that. They traveled with it. And yeah, that was a cool one. my brain is just flashing back to Guitar World ads. It's so cool. This is, you know what? I've been really excited about this live stream, and I'm loving the trip down memory lane and just geeking out on this shit. It's so cool. Love Canada, but when it comes to buying new gear and equipment, we're like 20 years behind. Yeah, it's rough. It's rough. And then the other problem is when you bring stuff in, I don't know about everybody else, but when I've tried to bring stuff in, because I do what I do for a living, even if it's a guitar, I'm not a guitar player, but obviously, but, you know, if I want a guitar just to have, they make me basically like, I don't know, it's some commercial import. It's crazy. It's nutty. So anyways, first world problems, I know. On your way to fast forward, don't skip the Hughes and Kettner Zenterra. You know what? I wanted the Zenterra, and when the Zenterra came out, I think I was broke as fuck. I don't know if I was going into recording school or if I'd just come out of I can't remember what it was, but I had no money. So the Zenterra was not an option. I remember the Hughes and Kettner Zenterra was expensive. And it did sound really, really, really good. But yeah. Couldn't you strap the Pandora to your guitar strap? Yeah, probably. Yeah. Pocket pod. That's right. I remember the little guy, little tiny pod. So I've said pod a couple times for, again, some of the younger viewers. The pod was Line6's recording box, and it looked like a little red kidney bean thing. And it was just direct only. Like there was no amp, there was no speakers. It was, I mean, again, ahead of its time, very reminiscent of some of these units that we have now. I can tell you right out of the gate, and I've recognized a couple names in the chat here. One in particular who I won't call out unless they want me to call them out. You can wave your hand if you want me to wave your hand. If you want to wave your hand. My first like real studio job was at Sony Music in Toronto, and I was the studio assistant there. And it must have been months, maybe like 3 or 4 or 5 months before like we mic'd a guitar cabinet or a guitar amp. Like there was a couple amps laying around the studio, but every room had a pod. And again, I was dealing with professional engineers, professional producers who've been around for a long time and done amazing work. Jeff, the person I'm talking about, one of the people is Jeff Dalziel here. He's an amazing producer, somebody who I consider a close friend and one of my early mentors. Like they were getting great sounds, and it was all the pod. And I even remember back then, they had some tricks to get the pod sounding better than anybody who was just plugging it in straight and not doing it. Everybody kind of had their own little trick to kind of get it to sound better than it actually did, which kind of makes me think about, I don't know if it was a Mike Shipley interview, maybe it was a Phil Collin interview, where they were talking about when Def Leppard was using the Rockmans on Hysteria. And there was a lot of like speculation that they were modded or that they did this and that. And I think what it ended up being was, it wasn't that they were modded or anything like that, but it basically, once like it got into the console, or once it got into, you know, onto the board, they did so much to the signal to shape it and to filter it and to mold it into what they wanted, that it was like, if you just go buy a Rockman, it's not going to be exactly that. Like they did a lot of stuff to it. We were doing that stuff like that with the pods. And so again, I keep saying when we get to it, we will get to it. I will shut up here. I've been going on for a half hour about amp modeling, but hey, that's what we're here for. We're here to geek out, right? But even today, like there's still things that I will do more on, let's say, an amp plugin than I would do if I was miking a guitar amp. Maybe it would be different than if I was using the Fractal. Like there's still things that you're going to do anyways. So who cares, like really if the source, you know, get as close as you can with the source, but if you have to start kind of carving it out, it's like, so what? It's like, it's where you end up, right? So anyways, the pod was so prolific. Every recording studio, every writer's room, every musician, every touring musician on a bus, everybody had those pods. And the sounds, again, it was so easy and quick to get like 85% of the way there. And for $500 and you got 16 or 20 or 30 amps or whatever and effects, and you can plug your headphones into it, and it's this big, you can put it in your suitcase or your carry-on luggage, or like, it's just, nobody cared whether or not it sounded like a real amp or not. I mean, there were a few people who were really digging in. Oh, they sound like shit because it doesn't sound like my JCM 800. And it's like, sounds close enough for most people for most of what they're doing. And so I never really bought into it, and bought into the comparison argument or the purist. I bought into it's not just a convenience factor, but it's like I said, it gets you like 85% of the way there really fast and really easy and relatively cheap. So why not? So yeah, there was the pod, the pod, and then the pod turned in. They had a rack mount pod. I think somebody in the chat here, somebody said this. Let me go back to the chat here, guys. Hang on one second. Original pod kidney bean. Yep, the good old kidney. I made my Fractal sound like the pod. Hey, I think I told this story already, so I'll try to make it fast. 2 Nickelback albums ago. Oh, here's an interesting fact. The pod eventually the sounds in the pod eventually turned into like one of the first like really good usable, well, I say good, really usable, I still think it's good, plugins for guitar, like guitar modeler plugins, was the Line6, I just spaced on it, Amp Farm, thank you. I had always heard through Chad and through Joey, who made the earlier records with Nickelback, that they would either use the Amp Farm plugin a lot on their earlier albums, or they would mix it in, and it definitely has a sound. It has a frequency that kind of does a thing. Anyway, so two Nickelback albums ago, we were going through some old hard drives, and we came across a couple guitar riffs that were really cool riffs, and they just sounded insane. And as soon as we heard them, we're like, oh, that's Amp Farm. Like, this was like just probably Chad messing around, writing some riffs, and it wasn't like they were recording an album. It was like he was just plugging in and recording whatever. And it just sounded massive. And I think we all kind of thought the same thing at the same time. We're like, and at the time, Amp Farm, there was like this empty space of Amp Farm didn't exist for like 5 years. It was very prolific. And then the Pro Tools systems changed over to the other cards, and then they lost support for that. And I can't remember what happened, but we didn't have Amp Farm at the time. Again, going down the rabbit hole, we went and found an old Pro Tools rig, found an old Pro Tools interface, and I hooked up, I set up this computer. I found an old iLock key that had a license to the original Amp Farm license. And we ended up modeling. There was three presets that we found that sounded kind of like the sound of these demos. And you could, I mean, even hearing the sound of the demos, like you're like, oh, I know that sound from that song. That's a massive hit from Dark Horse or whatever. And so we modeled, not the pod, we modeled Amp Farm. So I ran a signal through from the Fractal, basically did a tone match with the Axe-FX. It was probably the Axe-FX II at the time. Ran a loop into the other Pro Tools system, back into the Fractal, and did a tone match. So I've actually got Amp Farm tone match presets in probably an old Axe-FX II that's kicking around somewhere at Chad's studio. So yeah, that was kind of the funny. The modelers modeling modelers. Modelers modeling modelers. Okay. Somebody says here, I was helping engineer Mike Plotnikoff. Awesome engineer. Man, one of the best. He plugged me into a Line 6 pod rack version. Probably sounded fucking awesome. He probably added some EQ on the back end, and Bob's your uncle, as they say. What else? Mike, I'll talk about this stuff all day long. Well, you know what? This might turn into like a 4-hour live stream here if I'm not careful. Oh man. Pod into Groove Tube's brick tube preamp. Well, okay, so then that's when things started getting kind of interesting, is when like I said, I started experimenting with speakers. I started pulling out the kind of the flat full range speakers and putting in guitar speakers and turning off the speaker modeling and all that shit. People started turning that off and running through with the rack mount pod, the Pod Pro. People were running that into like Mesa simulclass power amps into like a 212 Recto cab, and it sounded insane. I remember one band, I wasn't working with them. I think I was visiting a studio, and I could hear the guitar player playing in the other room, and I'm like, fuck, that sounds awesome. And I went in, and that's what it was. It was a Line 6 Pod Pro into a simulclass 290 into a 212 Recto cab, and it sounded awesome. So there you go. Echo Pro. Yep, I used to have all those Pro units. I think I sold them not too long ago, but yeah, I mean, Line 6 made some great stuff, and like I said, it was a very interesting foray into the modeling world. And like we were talking about, yes, Roland did it. Yamaha had some stuff going. Obviously, like the Rockman. Digitech had some stuff. So there was a lot of stuff. But I think Line 6, not only was their advertising awesome, it hooked me, but their products were really good too. It was easy to use. Like the pod, the kidney bean, the fact that they made that look like that, at first you're like, this thing's ugly, this thing's weird. But the fact that it was like tabletop and not rack mount almost made it more accessible. And the fact that it just had like guitar amp knobs, the way that, there's a bass, there's a mid, there's a treble. You turn it to recto or rectifier or whatever it's called. You adjust a couple things, and you've got a better sound than I would say 90% of people could get with a rectifier and a 57 and a cabinet, because there's all the other variables that you actually have to know how to deal with. So yeah, pretty incredible. Really, really, really incredible. So I think maybe we should dig in here. Oh man, where do we start? Okay, well, you know what? Here's probably a really good place to start. I'm going to switch over to, let's go over to my Pro Tools screen. So I know I'm probably going to start getting questions or comments, and by all means, I get a lot of information from people making suggestions to me, and people make suggestions to me through socials when I see them in person, whatever, right? Comments. So by all means, like, I don't have everything. I haven't tried everything. I do try to make records for a living, and sometimes that means, I go months without actually like trying new stuff, because I don't typically try new stuff while I'm working on projects. I'll usually schedule some time to like download new things or buy new gear and try it out and run it through its paces. So by all means, fire up the chat, be like, have you tried this? Have you tried this? Have you tried that? Great. I'm not going to, this is not, we're not going to determine what the best thing is today. That's not what we're doing. But what I do want to kind of show you is just some of the options that are out there. And I wanted to be able to set it up in such a way where we can hear a bunch of different amp modelers, some with different some with different amps, like amp sims, going through the same IR. And it's pretty incredible, like how similar things can sound when it's going through the same IR. So really quickly, I'm just going to kind of fire through a bunch of options that I have, that I own, that I've used, that I've had clients use, that then I end up using because they send me stuff and they don't commit when they send me mixes or sessions to mix. I'm just going to go through some of the stuff that I've got, some of the stuff that I like, comment, just give you some insight on some various things here. And yeah, we'll go from there. So first things first, And obviously you can't see the Axe-FX in the rack here, but I will pull this up. And for those of you not familiar, I'm sure most people tonight are Fractal people, because obviously the preset was sent out today. So if you're not in the Fractal ecosystem, this is Axe-Edit, and this basically connects to the Fractal unit, to the Axe-FX units, and you can control just about everything, which is awesome, because it's a lot easier just to mouse through this than it is to do it on the front panel. And ultimately, like, my Axe-FX is at the bottom of the rack. I've got the cable going into it, and most of the time I actually don't really have to do anything on the front. I kind of live in here. So this is going to be my representation of the Fractal. Okay, and I apologize for that. Okay, so let's start with that. So, like I said, been using the Axe-FX. I think this is probably my 5th unit. They're very deep, and when I say deep, I'm just gonna pull up an amp here and turn it on to something. Okay, here's your first example of deep. These are all the different amp sim, like amp heads or amp preamps. Okay. And again, this isn't to say one's better than the other or not or whatever, right? Everybody's got their own tools, and it's all really fucking good. But when you go buy an amp sim from Neural or ML or whoever else, like, most of the time you're getting 1, 2, maybe 3 of amps. Obviously they're, $100 or $150 or whatever, so it's like the price point. But in the Fractal, as of right now, and I'm pretty sure I'm on the latest firmware, there's 320 amps. Like, that is fucking insane. So talk about deep, very deep. I will tell you, I'm a relatively disciplined person. I find it hard sometimes not to just go down the rabbit hole with this. And so I've had people that I've turned on to the Axe-FX maybe get like a little bit of a knee-jerk reaction. It's like analysis paralysis. Like, there's just too many options. And so what I like to do, and I'll recommend this to anybody who maybe finds themselves in that problem, is, again, I like to schedule time to do certain things and not do other things. And so I will, maybe once every 3 or 4 months, I will either, there's a couple companies that do really great preset packs. Fractals, obviously, their presets, a lot of their presets are really good. Some of them are a little too effecty for me, but now that with all the scenes, you can usually find a scene that's pretty dry. But what I'll do is I'll spend a half a day just scrolling through presets, or just trying out different amps. I'll put up an IR that I know I like. That's kind of like a balanced IR, and I'll just go through amps. And what I like to do is I've got a spreadsheet, just like a numbers or an Excel spreadsheet, and I've just got lists of which amp models or which preset numbers I like, and I'll make little notes. And the notes might be heavy saturated sound, good for open chords, or tight heavy tight chugging sound, or edge of breakup, great for diamonds. Diamonds are just or schlangs or frangs or whatever people like to call them. And that way, when I go to actually produce, or I go to record, or I'm mixing and I need to reamp, I go to my spreadsheet instead of this. I don't go to this. I go to my spreadsheet, and my spreadsheet might only have 20, 24 things on it. And I'm pretty discerning with it. And then I'll use those to make my own presets, obviously. And then I'll compare my presets against other presets, and I'll just keep, it's just a constant refining process, right? But the point is, there's 320 amps in here. I don't think of this as 320 amps. I think of this, to me, in my brain, in order to not just get completely bogged down, I've got like probably 20 amp models in here that I can do everything I need to do. So IRs are the same way. But anyways, this thing can get very deep. So let's pick something here. One of my favorite new models is actually the Rev Gen, which is like big 3-channel amp. That's actually Canadian, made up in Canada. I think I actually have one that's being built for me. I think. Hope, hint, hint. See, I still own amps, and I still use amps, because like what we'll get to is kind of like there is still scenarios where amps for that particular scenario are more desirable. Interesting thing is, it's not always just because of the sonics, which is what most people get bogged down with. But anyways, so again, talking about getting deep with the Fractal. So here you see you've got all your settings. Well, this is kind of, and I remember back in the day, they didn't have this ideal versus like authentic tab. This is the stock kind of default way. That is, these are the settings that are on the amp, pretty much. I mean, within reason. Ideal gives you like all these extra parameters that would be on, let's say, like if you were to really give you access to every little tone shaping thing on any amp. Well, and then you can start getting really deep. You can go and tweak the preamp and the tube hardness and the triode plate frequency. I don't even know what any of this stuff means. Power amp, negative feedback, transformer drive, speaker impedance, cathode resistance. Like, you can get so deep with this. Power tube type, power supply sag. Like, it's crazy. So I know people who have gotten turned off because this is so deep. That's not Fractal's fault. That's your fault for not being disciplined enough to ignore it. Because you can very easily, like I said, you can very easily use this unit, find 8 amp models that you like. You've got 2 amp blocks on each channel, load a different amp. For each amp block, you've got 4 channels. You can have a Fender Twin, JC120, Marshall JTM 45, Marshall 800. I don't know, just go down the list. Matchless DC 30, Mesa Rectifier, Mesa Mark IV, Soldano. Cool. Those are your 8 amps. If you had those 8 amps in real life, you'd be absolutely like, that would be like dream scenario. You don't need any more. So pick your 8, make a preset with those 8 in it, and you're done. Use this page here. Just use the main tone page. These are the settings, or the parameters that are on the amp. You don't have to go any deeper than that. So for anybody who gets bogged down by it, it's not Fractal's fault. That's your fault for not being disciplined to just stick to like the basics with this thing, right? Okay, so that's a Fractal. We'll come back to that. And like I said, it's not a plugin. This is an app that controls the hardware. Just want to be clear with that, because I'm going to scroll through a bunch of other stuff here. So this next thing I'm going to show you is going to spark a little conversation, because I saw somebody on the Fractal forum today ask. Okay. This is a signature plugin that I partnered with ML Sound Lab to develop a couple of years ago. And this is based off of my personal Diesel VH4. Somebody in the forum asked, they're like, he's got his own plugin, but why didn't his preset have a VH4 amp in it, and the Fractal preset? And honestly, I've actually got a really great VH4 preset in the Fractal that I use a lot. The reason why I wanted to develop the plugin is for all of the benefits of a plugin. Number one, it's easy, it's cheap. I can be working on any rig. I can be working on a laptop with a 2-channel interface. Like, I can be at another studio that maybe doesn't necessarily, I don't want to have to rip my Fractal out of the rack and take it over and whatever. I wanted access to my VH4 or a simulation of it at all times. And I wanted, like, the fact that this plugin got released was so that way it could pay for the development. I wanted this for me. And there were supposed to be another 5 amps that we were supposed to develop, but I don't think ML wants to do any more amps with me because I was a bit of a pain in the ass by really pushing this thing to the next level, and we'll leave it at that for now. The ML stuff is great. I have most of their plugins. Their stuff is really good. I like their cab section here, the way that works. Here's another really good company that does a lot of awesome amp sims. This is Neural DSP. I'd say I probably get more sessions from people with the Gojira plugin on the guitars than any other amp sim plugin ever, since maybe like Amp Farm. But the fact that somebody will send me a session, I'm like, man, those guitars sound good, and I'll open up the session, and it's like, yep, that's that Gojira plugin again. I really like this Soldano. I've always been a big fan of Soldanos. I actually, even though I have access to all these plugins, I still want to get one. I like the smell of tubes. I like looking over and seeing a rack of amps, and we'll talk about why that is. What else we got? So here's the Line6 Helix, and obviously Line6 does make the Amp Farm again, and which I actually still use Amp Farm quite a bit, and I'll use Amp Farm on non-guitar stuff as well, just because it's quick and easy to just kind of distort stuff with it. But this is the Helix, which is kind of like more of their full, like, just, you can be crazy with this. Look, ripple, bias, sag. It's kind of taking like Amp Farm into like the Fractal kind of ecosphere, I guess. Here's another one that I actually really like. This is the IK Multimedia Amplitude. This has got a lot of cool options, and this had a lot of amp, like, head models that not a lot of the other companies were doing. Sounds pretty good. I've used this on records before when just looking for something specific, or just scrolling through, or just playing around. Native Instruments has got one. Don't show, thank you very much. And this is kind of like their Soldano-ish version. It's Native Instruments guitar rig. BX, or Plugin Alliance, whatever, I guess BX, it's all kind of the same thing. And they do, as far as I know, they're the ones who provide the algorithms for the Universal Audio amp sims as well. So like this Friedman BE100 is like the UAD Friedman 100. I've never done a direct AB, compared them, phase cancel them. I don't care. I'm pretty sure it's the same. I think it even says Plugin Alliance on it. I'm a huge Plugin Alliance fan. I use a lot of their plugins. Same with like the UAD stuff. I do use the UAD stuff for whatever reason, and I haven't really been able to figure out. My ear does not somehow match up with most of the BX amp sims. I've recorded Friedman Brown Eyes. On the Fractal, one of my favorite amp heads in model in that is a Friedman. I don't necessarily find this super usable. The Diesel VH4, I got a lot of questions when I released that Diesel. They're like, aren't there already, doesn't UAD or BX already have that? I love the VH4. That's probably my favorite single amp, and I've never been able to get much usable out of that, the BX, or the BX's VH4. Again, I don't know why. It's probably operator error. I know some people who love them. I like all their other plugins. They're just their amp sims, something about it just doesn't agree with me. The Waves guitar stuff, they've got one that's called I think it's called GTR, and then this is their newer one called Voltage Amps. Haven't played around with that too much. And then I've got a couple other ones here that I added because they're kind of a little bit of a different take on modeling. One thing we haven't talked about tonight is the Kemper. And the Kemper is a little bit of a different beast. And I remember being at NAMM the year that Kemper, the first year Kemper, they weren't even for sale yet, but they were at NAMM. And I remember walking by the booth and not really knowing, and I think I was meeting somebody, so I was walking pretty quickly through the place, and I walked past the Kemper booth, and it just caught me right at the right time where the guy who was playing and presenting, he was doing a little presentation, there wasn't much of a crowd, but it caught my ear, the fact that he was like running this thing through this amp. I was like, what the fuck's that guy doing? And so I stopped and watched for like 2 seconds, and then he started playing and he started switching back and forth, and I was like, holy shit, that guy just like modeled it right in front of my eyes. So the Kemper kind of blew my mind the first time I saw that. And I ended up I didn't end up buying a Kemper for myself. I was already on the Fractals, and I like the Fractals, the way I like the tweakability of the Fractals and how they model, versus kind of the capture modeling, which we're going to show a couple plugins that do that. But I got some for some clients. I recommended them for, touring rigs, for, there was one project in particular where we were doing a lot of guitars. We were writing over the course of recording the album. So we would do a song and then we would get, like verse chorus was done, but the bridge wasn't done. So we would have to then move on to another song and then come back. And so like trying to keep track of like amp settings and mic placement and all that shit was a pain in the ass. So we actually bought a Kemper specifically to model the tones we were using. And then we would move on to another song. And then when the guitar player would write the bridge, we would go to the Kemper and punch in the bridge. Or if there was a note that changed, we would go and punch it in. And it was so close enough to where I've never heard anybody be like, oh yeah, that third chord in the bridge, I think you guys might have punched that in on a different amp, right? And I was like, no, you can't tell. And so the Kempers are pretty cool. And there's a couple plugins that kind of do more of like the capture type modeling process. This one's STL. And this is the David Bendith pack. It's hilarious. Dave, I love David. I didn't know this until I got this pack, but his amp, I own 6 guitar amps. Let me just look here. I own 6 guitar amps, and one of them's a Naylor Super Drive, which is one of the ones in his bundle here. One of them is a VHD Pitbull, and the other one is the Diesel VH4, and then a couple combos. Are you guys still here with me? Somebody just said in the chat that they lost the feed. Give me a thumbs up if we're still going here. Says we're good. Okay, why don't I go to the chat actually for a second here. STL tones are killing it. Tonality suites are beast. Yep, okay. Yeah, like, again, these are all tools, man. These are all tools. And so we are just using the tools for however we need to get what we need to get from them, right? Okay. Thanks for the signal check there. So anyways, you got the STL Tone Hub, which is more of a, like, this is almost a little bit more like Kemperish, where it captures an entire chain. It captures the sound. And then it gives you a little bit of options with, bass and treble and gain and stuff like that. But basically, it's kind of giving you a snapshot, and then those adjustments aren't necessarily the same as, what you'd be tweaking, like when you're turning the treble knob on a Fractal. It's not the same thing. Or with the CB4, like, it's not quite the same thing. But and then my buddies over at JST, Joey Sturgis. This is actually a plugin that I was checking out when they first released it. It's got a really cool thing called DI Match on it, which, again, like, just the tools that are available to us right now are pretty amazing. But this is the same kind of idea. These are a bunch of amps that Dino from Fear Factory had, that like amp tones from albums that they went and modeled. And so depending on what kind of, I don't want to even say like what kind of player you are or what kind of producer or engineer you are. Sometimes it's a matter of like what you're doing. You can reach for different tools. So there are going to be some times where I'm going to reach for a Tone Forge or an STL. I just want like a mix ready sound. It's already done, ready to go. Leave everything at noon and it's done and it's ready to go. You scroll through some presets, you find something you like, good. Probably not going to tweak it much. Like that's not what I'm in there for. Maybe it's a part that we're just kind of doing like a really scratch demo and I don't want to spend time like tweaking a sound. I might reach for something in that scenario. If I'm sitting down with a guitar player and we're starting an album and we're trying to craft that person's sound for the album, I'm going to go to the Fractal all day long. And then a lot of these plugins like this one here, like the Neural, like those are kind of like the in-betweens. Those are the ones where you can pop it up, put some presets on, you're in the box, so you can play some parts, you can save that, the setting stays with it. You can go and come back to it 5 days later and your settings are going to be the same. You don't have to remember which preset number you were on. You don't have to remember what IR you were, like there's definitely a workflow aspect to where these plugins make a lot of sense. But any questions about anything so far? I'm just gonna have a quick look. Helix, I don't mind. My friend has it one to mess around with. Yeah, the Helixes are good. The Plugin Alliance Ampeg stuff. The bass stuff is actually pretty good. Yeah, I do use the bass stuff. The BX VH4 is nothing like the real deal. Yeah, I don't know why that is. I have no idea. Getting a modeling unit for Christmas. Can't decide. Tone X, Helix Stomp. I don't know. Maybe some other people can chime in with the with those. Bring back rack mount modelers. That's what we're doing. Rack mount. Bring back. Where did they go? Fractal's been doing this for like 15 years, man. We don't need any more. Does everything we need. Kemper, yep, Jordan, you capture tones, man. It's like the recall tool. Yeah, well, that's what you said, recall tool. STL is great. I mean, like I said, everything's really good right now. So, okay, all right, we're going to start listening to some stuff because I want to show you a little bit about kind of the IR process. And then I think what we'll do is I'm actually going to pull open the Axe-Edit. We're going to go through a preset here. But really quickly, I'm just going to play some. You guys hearing that? Give me a thumbs up if you are. Okay, so just give you guys I just laid down kind of a quick, just kind of schlocky stock riff here. Just a DI. And then I've got the DI routed to a bus that is feeding all of these different plugins. And then all of the plugins are feeding basically the cab, and which is, I'm going to show you a couple different IR options. So one of the kind of the quick and easy kind of no-brainer ones is the Miko 2 from ML. And it's probably just like the easiest to use, and it usually get a good sound out of it really easily and quickly. And this is kind of what the Dynacab in the Fractals, like the workflow is kind of similar to this as well. So I literally have this on the factory default setting. And the thing I want to just show you really quickly is, as I was scrolling through all of the plugins, I've got my Diesel VH4 from ML. We've got the Neural Soldano. We've got the Line6 Helix. I don't even know what... Uber Sonic is probably the Uber Shawl. Okay, we got an Uber Shawl. We got the... I skipped over 11. 11 from Avid. I've used this a ton on records. Sounds good. We've got the rectifier. Like, the point of the point of me saying this is we're not talking like we're comparing all the Soldanos from all the amp sims. We're comparing completely different sounds, but they're all running through the same IR. And I want to just quickly show you guys, like, again, we're not looking, do they match up? That's not what we're looking for. What I want you guys to hear is how one is actually pretty reminiscent of the other, to the other, to the other, to the other, because they're going through the same IR. So the reason why I want to display this for you guys is because I see people all the time on YouTube doing these comparison tests. I mean, even when the CB4 came out, like, it frustrated me so much. People would be doing an A/B comparison with like 3 different amp modelers. Like, oh, we're going to compare the Diesel VH4 on these three companies. And they were using completely different IRs. And I'm like, what the fuck? And even the same thing with when you're trying to compare an amp and a real amp and a modeler with different cabs and different, like, it's not apples to apples. So you got to be using the same IR to really kind of get a fair comparison. And then once you start putting the same IR on everything, it's amazing how reminiscent things can start sounding. So I just want to do a quick loop here. I'm going to switch through, and actually, I'm wondering, let's do this. I think, there we go. If I use my control surface here, when I hit my select button, perfect. Okay. All right, so this will pull up the sim so you can see what's playing. Okay, here we go. It doesn't sound quite as similar, but get a little more level here. So again, we're not trying to, I wasn't trying to match those up to make them sound exactly the same. The idea is to show you guys how, like, once you put the same IR and everything, like, it's a big filter that's all of these amps are now going through. So when you're comparing things, you got to understand that if you're really, if you want to, like, dig in and really, like, compare apples to apples, you got, number one, you got to be using the same IR. If you're using an amp sim that you like the IRs that come with it, or you like the cab portion of it, that's great. Use that, but understand that that's why it sounds the way it's sounding. Like you're basing your sonic decisions almost more on the IR than you are like the actual amp. If you're just doing kind of this type of test, that was a more, like I said, that was more for just kind of an FYI, because I wanted you guys to understand that as soon as you start changing the IR, all bets are off. It's not going to sound anything the same if you're using two just separate IRs, even if it's the exact same amp model. And you've got the settings and the volumes matched really, really accurately. So, okay, let's pull up, let's dig into the Fractal. I think that's what a lot of people here want to know. Actually, let me look at my notes really quickly here. There's something else I wanted to talk about here. Oh, speaking of comparing, going back to kind of, something that I talked about in the, the whole title of this video is like, who cares if they sound real? What is the goal with an amp modeler? And I think if we think about that a little bit, I think it would probably change some perceptions as to what they're good for and why they're so great. I would say some amp modelers the goal was to make them sound identical to their physical counterpart. I know with my CB4, that was a big thing. It's like I wanted to get it as close as possible, and we got pretty darn close. But ultimately, at the end of the day, the goal is to have a tool that you can make a good sounding guitar tone with. And ultimately, if it sounds exactly the same as its counterpart, who cares? It doesn't really matter. And so take it for what it is. If you can get a good sound out of it, great. And if you can't, there's probably a variety of reasons why you can't. And most of the time, it's not because of the amp versus software or amp versus digital, or it's not that. It's usually a tweaking thing. It's usually just maybe you get too zoomed in when you're dealing with modelers where you have just infinite amounts of options. The other thing I want to mention is I've seen a lot of people do ABs with real amps, and even if you're in a studio that's soundproofed pretty well, if you're doing an AB and you've got to have either you got to be doing your comparison only on playback, or when you're doing your comparison with, let's say, the Axe-FX versus an amp, you have to be letting the amp, mute the mic, but let the amp roar, because even just the vibrations through the room will influence. I've seen this 1,000 times. I've seen like people AB stuff, especially when the Fractal was new, and I bring it in, people will be like, "What is that?" And I'd explain to them, and like, "Yeah, whatever. Let's hear it." And we would AB. And they would turn an AB switch or something, so then the amp wouldn't be going, and then they'd fire up the amp and they'd go back, "Oh no, it's way better." And I'd be like, "Okay, let's record it and let's just hear it on playback." And then on playback, sometimes they couldn't tell the difference, or they would like the Fractal better, or sometimes it was amp better. But at least at that point, you're not getting tricked into thinking something's better because it's got this really low end resonance that gives you a feeling. The other thing about doing the test versus playback, live versus playback, is especially if you're dealing with a plugin. Even if you're on an HDX rig with a DSP plugin, like there is a little bit of latency, and some guitar players are way more sensitive to that than others. So everybody's got to decide on their own whether or not that's an issue. But if we're just talking about from pure sonics, the way it sounds coming out the speakers, the only way to do a proper comparison is to just do it on playback. So that way you're not letting feel influence the actual sound. Now, if your goal is you're like, I want to play and I want it to feel good, and it's not just about the sound. Okay, well, just be aware that that's part of your criteria and you're making your decisions based off that. So, all right. Let's dig into the Fractal, and then we'll come back to some of these other kind of amp modeling things that I think everybody needs to be very aware of. Things like input level, how hard you're hitting the front of the modelers, like all of that stuff. There hasn't really been a very good standard established, unfortunately. Every company kind of does it a little bit differently. So, okay, let's pop open the Fractal. Let me just make sure I'm actually getting signal through the Fractal. Okay, and I'm going to bypass that. All right. Okay, so let's go to... So this was the preset that was sent out today. And I need to change a few things here because I'm routing my signal through. So I'm just going to get rid of that completely. I'll leave the cab block for now. And I need to get rid of the gate. Actually, let me just move the gate to that's there. Okay. I think this gate's going to be a problem. I'm going to cut the gate out. Okay. All right. Hopefully you guys can hear that. Somebody said in the chat, Axe-FX III, best investment in music gear in my 50 plus years of playing. Regular firmware updates, add more amps features. Yeah, I mean, the Fractal, again, like, this isn't me selling the Fractal. The Fractal is just, is my thing of choice. So I'm just telling you kind of like where I'm at. But I think it's a pretty amazing unit, and it does a shit ton of stuff that I needed to do. So Fractal's commenting here, our front end is Unity, so your guitar hits the model exactly as it would hit an amp. This is true regardless of how you were just or pad the level of the AD converter. Okay, so yes, and I know when you're plugged straight into the unit, that's the case. I do have a question regarding reamping, and when we get to this, I'll maybe, if you're still around, I'm not sure who from Fractal's here, but there's a few things in the Fractal that I've just, maybe it's because I'm a studio guy, so the way that I think about levels is a little different, but we'll come back to that. So my Fractal library of presets, I have a very, I don't want to say it's like it's a novel concept, but part of my whole like studio philosophy, and I got this really instilled in me when I was working at the chop shop, when I first went down to LA, like more than 20 years ago. I guess probably 21 years ago. Our concept there was everything is always set up and ready to go. So all you have to do is either put an input in Pro Tools on, and whatever that thing that we need is ready to go, or you unmute a channel, or you put an insert button in, or whatever the scenario was. When we mic'd up drums, we left the drums mic'd up. If we needed more mics for guitar cabinets, we bought more mics. If we needed more mic pre's for those mics, we bought more mic pre's. Things never got shared. Things never got repatched. We always left things patched in. Everything was always ready to go at all times. It was awesome. And we actually had, like, kind of like what the Fractal is at the chop shop, we had 8 amps with switchers, and everything had its own mics. Everything had its own mic preamps. We had 8 amps, always hooked up, always mic'd up, always ready to go, always tweaked to something good. So literally somebody could walk through the door, plug in, and start playing, and I could just go unmute channels on the board, and you're hearing great tone, like just like that. And then we had 3 pedal boards that we could insert into the loop at any point, or insert into the chain at any point in time, and click on pedals. We had a variety of chorus pedals, a variety of drive pedals. It was just like everything always ready to go, good to go. Okay. That has been my philosophy pretty much ever since, and figuring out ways to set up your workflow so that you're not getting bogged down by decision making. You're not getting bogged down by having to route stuff or patch stuff or set levels or set parameters. You should be able to go. If you want guitar players sitting there, he's like, yeah, I want to lay down a quick solo. Like, not like, oh, here's a shitty sound for now, and then we'll come back and get it later. It's like, no, here's a good sound. Like, play something good. So what I like to do, you'll see in my Fractal preset here, I've got a ton of blocks, and this isn't gonna be like beginner Fractal stuff here. So if you don't know what blocks are, you're gonna have to probably go back and do a little bit of digging. But blocks are kind of like your virtual pedals or your virtual amps or your virtual cabinets, right? But basically what I like to do is I like to set up just about anything and everything I might need in order to do a session, or in order to write a song, or in order to track guitars or produce whatever, right? So what I've got here is you've got your input block. I've got it switched over to 2 because I'm routing my Pro Tools through it. I've got a pitch block, and on the pitch, here's another thing, not trying to get into like beginner fractal stuff, but on your pitch block, or every block has 4 channels, and each channel can be a different different setting, different type of effect, type of amp, whatever that particular thing is. So what I like to do is I like to get all of my blocks routed, and I like to put an option, a good usable option on every channel. So if you've downloaded this from Fractal today and you've just been playing and you haven't been turning on and off the blocks, definitely do turn them on and off. And when you do turn them on and off, scroll through the channels, because there's 4 usable options on every channel. So walking through this really quickly, I've got a pitch block. I've got a virtual capo on channel A. Got a dual chromatic shift to give me like an octave up, octave down, kind of like a POG. I've got a whammy, and then I've got an arpeggiator, which for those of you who haven't played with the arpeggiator, it's fucking cool. Really cool. Excuse me. I've got a compressor. And again, you've got 4 options. You've got like a Dynacomp. You've got the pedal compressor 2. Then you've got optical sustainer and a JFET sustainer. They all just have slightly different sounds. Just, again, you don't even really need to know what you're doing. You can just, if you're going for a sound, turn it on, scroll through a couple different of the options that I've given you and find one that you like. Then once you find one that you like, you can tweak it even further. But instead of having to start from scratch and getting bogged down and overwhelmed by like, oh, which pedal do I use? Because, by the way, like, look at all the compressors you can pick. And if you need to compress a signal and you're dealing with like the hardware analog version and you've got a Dynacomp pedal, you've got 1 pedal option and you've got 1 knob, you're going to make that decision real fast. So what I'm trying to do is limit those decision-making kind of road bumps. So that way it doesn't slow down the process and it doesn't overwhelm anybody. Okay. Okay, so that's your compressor. You've got a volume control here, and I don't have this routed. I've got a pedal right here. You can see that moving. So I've got a volume pedal. Wah, same thing. Here's 4 different options. You've got a Crybaby, a Vox, a Clyde wah, and the Mortal wah. All different sounds. They all have different sweeps. Like, really quickly, you could be playing a guitar solo and be like, okay, let's put a guitar solo down with a wah. And you can really quickly, 1, 2, 3, 4, pick a wah that sounds good. There's a scenario where I don't know anybody who's got a setup with 4 wahs that can be switched at an instant like that to hear which sweep works best for which range you're playing in. I've never seen that in the studio. It's kind of like, oh, let's grab the other one. Then wait 60 seconds, plug it in, put it in, try to figure out, oh, I put the cables on the wrong side, blah, 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 whatever. Like, so fast. You don't need to route it. You don't need to go through menus. You just turn it on and just start playing and pick whatever wah works the best. Same with the drives. If you go to Nashville, a lot of the studio guys in Nashville, you look at their pedal boards, you know, they'll have like a reverb pedal, like a multi-effects, or like like one of the Line6 multi-effects. They might have like 8 drive pedals because they're all just different flavors. And that's what I've done here as well. So you turn on the drive and you've got 4 options that are different. So depending on what part you're playing, you can very quickly and easily just pick a channel and go, right? It's very quick. The GEQ, I don't have anything set on this. This is more of a utility plugin. You could really change the character of a guitar or change the character of a pickup with a graphic EQ in front of the amp. And so I always put one kind of in the chain there. Chorus pedal, same thing. You got 4 different options on each channel. I know I'm being extremely redundant right now, but sorry, somebody was saying something about a technical issue. Okay. With the flanger here, same thing. Got a bunch of different flange options. Phaser. Got different trem options. Got a rotary speaker. Okay, so here's the graphic EQ. Again, there's another one in front of the amp. This one I use... just so for people who are wondering what this is. So in Axe-Edit or in the Fractal Axe-FX, you can jump, you can like teleport the signal using these send and return blocks. So you can have whenever you run out of space on the grid, you can hit a send, and then it will, wherever you put the return block, it basically routes it back into there, right? Again, you've got the GEQ here. You've got another 4 different drives. Oh, here's a question that I got from somebody I was actually tracking guitars with, and they asked me, they're like, what's the difference between this drive block and this drive block? So I use this top row for me is mainly about quote unquote like effects. So these drives are more like fuzz pedals and like more like overdrives and distortions. And the drive pedal that's right in front of the amp block here, or the drive block, that's more for pushing the amp. So I don't want to say an overdrive, but because they're not all overdrives, like they might be a distortion, it might be a boost or whatever, but that's mainly for kind of not necessarily like a distortion effect, but more is like I'm trying to get the amp I'm trying to push the amp a certain way. So these are usually a little bit more subtle. And this bottom row is more for that. Amp block we talked about, and I'm going to dive into the amp block here in a second because that's where things get really fun. Delay block, same with the delays. So like on channel A, I've got like a quick slap. Channel B is kind of like an edge dotted eighth thing. And then I've got like a mono quarter note, and then a longer kind of lower, like kind of top end rolled off analog delay as well. Same with the reverbs. Got a short, you got a spring. You got kind of like a shorter hall sound. Then you got a big long hall sound, and then you've got like a shimmer verb. And cabinets as well, same thing. Each cabinet. And I've been using the Dynacabs a lot. I really do like the Dynacabs. Nudge, nudge, hint, hint to Fractal. I want more options. I'm sure I'm not the first person to say that. I find like I've got like 4 here that I just go to for everything, and it would be cool just to have just maybe a few more just character options. But for the most part, like you can get a lot of amazing sounds with being able to change the mics, change the cabs, change the positions. Like it's pretty cool. And the way you just pick up the blue mic position here and move it around. You can hear the sweep in real time. Again, that's something that like you can kind of do that in the real world, but you kind of can't. So I think when people start digging into modelers, like their expectation level just goes through the fucking roof. Like I can't tell you how many times when people are miking up a guitar cab, they just go out and they eyeball a spot, and then they go back into the control room. They're like, yeah, cool, sounds good. And then they just keep going. I have never seen somebody do that with a modeler. I've never, like, very rarely. Like, they're, you know, oh, does 2 centimeters or is it 3 centimeters? Let's hear 2 centimeters again. Oh, let's hear 3 centimeters again. People don't do that with real amps. I mean, every once in a while you do when you're, like, you know, really digging in. Let's say you're tracking a whole guitar's worth of record, or a whole record worth of guitars. But most people are just putting it up and rolling with whatever it sounds like. You know, they're putting, maybe they move it a few inches here and there, but you're not A-Bing 4 different spots in over the course of 60 seconds. So, like, it's amazing how the expectation and the level of scrutiny just goes through the fucking roof the minute that you have these kinds of options. But, you know, it's good that we do. And then this PEQ block, which is a parametric EQ block, and I use that to just carve out some kind of just some shit that I probably would do on a console if I was miking up a guitar cab, where I might just notch out and filter off and maybe roll off some frequencies here as wherever needs it. If it doesn't need it, you don't have it on. You leave it off. But again, the point is, it's routed, it's here, it's ready to go, and that way you're not. If somebody says, "Oh, can I get a flanger?" You're not like, "Okay, now I got to go to flange. Where is it? Okay, it's here. Okay, what kind of flanger do you want? Oh, I can't decide. Which one should we use? I don't know, 80s rack flange." Like, that's problematic. And that's the thing I think is the most detrimental thing when you start getting into these modelers, is it's not the modeler's fault. It's the operator's fault for getting way too, like, just zoomed in on shit. So, like I said, whether it's feel free to copy these blocks and import them into your templates or your presets. But yeah. So the amps here, I'm actually just let's go back here. So the amps, the scenes. So how I've set this up for you guys. So how my presets work. And I won't dive into too much of this tonight because we're already 90 minutes in. But so what I do is I organize my presets by, like, sounds. So I'll have a clean preset. And in that clean preset might have, it has 8 scenes. And I usually use 2 different amp blocks. I kind of do one of these things. So, and then one of them gets switched on and one of them gets switched off. So because I've got 2 amp blocks with 4 channels each, and then I can switch them on and off by saving the scenes, I essentially can give myself 8 different clean sounds. I can have 8 different amp models. I can have 8 different cabs. I can have 8 different combinations of compressors and GEQs and all that stuff, right? So again, when I'm working on a record, if somebody's like, okay, I've got this, clean part that I'm going to do, I'll go to my clean preset and I'll pull one up and I'll just flick through 8 sounds really quickly and be like, do you like any of those? And they'll be like, oh, let's hear number 4 again. And I'll switch to scene 4. Let's hear number 7 again. Switch to scene 7. Okay, cool. That sounds good. Let's roll with that. And then what I'll do is I'll save that to a new preset number. And then we can start tweaking specifically for that part, for that person, for that whatever. And that makes things really, really functional and really easy. So I've got one for clean. I've got one for, like, edge of breakup. I've got one for, like, dirty. And then I've got one for more, like, heavy tones. And then, like, a special effect one. So what I did for you guys with the Fractal preset that got sent out today was I went and grabbed a few scenes or a few, like, setups from each of those and put it into one. So for instance, the Morgan AC20, that came from my clean preset. The Tucana came from my edge of breakup preset. The Marshall JVM, that came from, like, my dirty preset. And then the Rev Gen came from my heavy preset. Okay. So let's just scroll through some of these sounds here and hear them. Okay. So here is, this is kind of obviously kind of a little bit of a, you know what? Let's actually we'll go to the big frang. Okay, I'm going to get rid of this so it doesn't get in our way here. Okay, so here's the, just by using the scene select up here, you can hear the different sounds. So here's a clean. Right? Okay, got a little chorus, got a little compression, got a little reverb. Here's a little dirtier clean. Okay, got a little slapback delay on there. Okay, now we're getting into a little bit more push. Here's another nudge for Fractal, just because I know I can bust their balls tonight because they're here. How often you get guys from Fractal tuning into your live stream? My second favorite amp, and actually like channel for channel, it's probably my favorite channel of any amp, is the Naylor SuperDrive 60, which I have one. I would love it if you guys did a Naylor SuperDrive model, and I'll even offer up a donor amp for it if you want. I'll get mine to you guys. You guys can do that. But this Carol Ann Tucana kind of, it doesn't sound like the Naylor SuperDrive, but I would use it for those types of parts. So I wanted to put that in there while I had the ears. Okay, and then we push that a little more. Cool. Okay, and then the JVM, it's hilarious. I've used the JVMs, like the actual Marshall JVMs. Like, I don't actually own a Marshall, and if I was going to recommend a Marshall amp to anybody, like if they were going to do tour and they wanted a live amp or even a studio amp or something like that, man, the JVMs are great amps. I think people they get a bad rep because they're new, and people just think old Marshalls are the only way to go. But I really love the JVMs and the Fractal. The Fractal JVM Sims are like the models are some that I use the most. Like I love the clean, the full clean. I love the heavy, like it's great. So this is kind of their good dirty sound right here. Okay, and let's push that a little harder. Delay. Okay, and then we're going to the Rev Gen on the Red 2 channel. And then we'll push that a little more. I've got, I'm using a GEQ to just give us some like mid-range and some level. That gives you an overall sense of kind of what this is. Now, if you were, let's say you were using, let's say that last scene, right? And somebody somebody in the studio wanted to do a guitar solo or something. You say, can you give me some reverb and some delay? You can very quickly. Right? Some reverb. That one's not gonna work. So that's the shimmer verb, but let's throw something else on here. So I was just scrolling through some phaser sounds. It's like you can pick what phaser sound you want. Like it's very quick and easy to do. So there's one other thing that I wanted to dig in on some of these fractals, like, or some of these Axe-FX presets that you guys are hopefully downloading and playing with. as you can see, I've got a bunch of guitars. This preset is not going to work for all of those guitars the way that it was when I made it. I actually used a guitar that's right next to me here. It's not really like super high gainy pickups. Like I did tweak on. I plugged a few different guitars in it, but it's not. You've got to be able to tweak it a little bit. That's with any preset, right? Presets aren't it's a starting point. It's not a here's my finished sound. It's kind of like, okay, here's a suggestion to start with. And if it works, great. And if you need to start adjusting stuff, fine. That's why I put in these PEQs. The other thing is these Dynacabs are incredible. Like, check this out. I just completely changed the sound of that preset. So if I had a really bright pickup, or if I had a part, or if the song that I'm recording, that preset is too bright, just quickly tweak it. I like sizzly, I like bright, sizzly guitar tones. It's interesting because when I mix, I sometimes am finding myself like rolling off top end and like carving out high end. But when I'm tracking, I just like the feel of that. And I know a lot of guitar players do. Just when it's really cutty, really bitey, and just like you feel every little, it's like you feel like each like layer of the string, like all the grooves in the strings. Like it's a fun, exciting sound to play with. But being able to really quickly and simply just drag the Dynacab and completely change the tone. Like I'll tell you right now, moving that little blue dot just from there to there is going to make a way bigger difference than any direct A/B comparison that you could do to any other amp modeler or amp or whatever. So just kind of keep that in mind. So I'm going to go to the chat really quickly and answer a couple questions here. Oh, okay. Check this out here. I saw a bunch of talk in here with the Fractal guys about level. A new beta came out during the stream. No shit. Okay, great. You're correct about there's no industry standards. Most amp sims have their own way, have no way to do it because we control the DI, like you control the input. Yes. And that was actually something that I was going to bring up earlier when we were talking about like, well, what's the benefit of a hardware versus a software? And one of those things is removing the variables. So whether it's the Fractal or whether it's any other unit, or back in the day with the Line 6, like they're controlling what the level is on the front, because that front end is been designed to be implemented with whatever the models are. There's something to be said for the simplicity and the consistency and just like not having to think about it. There's a huge benefit to that. I know a lot of people who will completely write off certain plugins because they're like, oh, that thing sounds like shit. And then you realize they were either pumping way too much level into it or not enough level into it. And so they're having that standardized hardware for me is a benefit with a lot of things. Like with Pro Tools, I have an HDX system with an HDX card. And again, it's not needed, but the fact that I've got an HDX card kind of standardizes a little bit. Like I know what my track counts are going to be. I know if I'm using DSP plugins, what my latency is going to be. I know if I'm using a DSP plugin on an auxiliary return or a master fader. There's a predictability there that I don't have if I don't have that hardware. And that's sometimes what the benefit of the hardware can really be. So yeah, that's a really good point. Let's see. Fractal, any plans to do an amp-only pedal like Tone X? If so, I'm in. Interesting. Fractal sounds the best to me. Your preset levels were really low on my unit. I had to decrease amp level 10 dB to get 0 dB output. Was that by design? Do you run your levels low? Okay, well, that's actually a good question. I do run my levels low, but I don't think this one was actually too low. And I see here, I checked levels with a hot guitar and chugs. They were just right. Lower than factory presets, but fine. Yeah, so maybe that's just me. I have a saying that, and obviously it's like every DAW is different, but I have a saying that yellow is the new red. And what I mean by that is, if you look at my meter here, okay, let's look at the meter right there. I'm not even hitting the yellow. So when I'm recording anything, for me, yellow's the new red. I don't even come close to peaking red. Like if I start seeing yellow in Pro Tools with the meters set the way that mine are set, which I think is like the new default setting, that's as much as I'd go. The other thing that, you know what, I'll come back to that. If I don't remember, remind me to tell you guys how I deal with recording DIs. Because I always record the DI alongside the amp signal. And I've got a little bit of a unique way to do that. But we'll come back to that. Lower than factory. Yep. FM9 all sounds great, but with Kemper, you buy third-party profiles. Some are awesome. A lot of waste of money. Yep. I mean, it's like with anything. I mean, most people aren't selling stuff that they don't like themselves. Usually somebody made that preset. They're like, oh, this sounds good. Maybe it sounds good with their guitar. Maybe it sounds good in their studio. Maybe it sounds good on their room. It just doesn't gel with what you want or what you've got going on. So yeah, that's the kind of the pro and con of this market of presets and samples and this and cabs and IRs and amp models. You know, there's lots of options for us. They're not all going to work for everybody. It was only his camera. Yeah, I know. It's always fucking technical issues here. I'll get dialed in at some point. Don't worry. Do you record your signal out of the Fractal straight into the computer or process it through an analog EQ and or compressor going into it? Okay, so I used to run. I basically patch, like back when I was working on an SSL, I would take the output of whatever modeler I was using. You know, let's say the first or second Fractal would have been at that time when I was still on hardware. I would run it to the board first, so that way I could use the SSL EQ, or I can put another piece of gear in. I would. It doesn't mean it was more of like the scenario like I've been talking about. I would have it set up that way in case I wanted to use it. Then I wouldn't have to change a bunch of stuff. But I didn't really find myself actually doing it too much. And ultimately, as these have become way more powerful, like the Fractals have become way more powerful, like this move on the PEQ, let me show you real quick here. This move on the PEQ here, that's something that I may have done on the console, like let's say 15 years or 10 years ago. Now, probably 15 years ago now. That's something I may have done on, on the console. Now I just do it on the PEQ block because ultimately I want that sound to be saved. So it's a better workflow for me to actually do it within here and then have it saved with the preset. Haven't used Fractal yet. Chris's presets are awesome. Thank you. Appreciate that. What's up, Mike? Mike Langford in the house. Nice compression on the clean. Yeah, like, I mean, the compression, that's a perfect example. Like there's not any preset that's going to work for a compressor preset that's going to work for everybody and every guitar. I could grab 3 other guitars from behind me and that compressor is going to sound like shit. So that's why, number 1, don't be afraid to adjust the level. Number 2, flip through a couple different options and see, because one of them I've set to really clamp down. The other one's not clamping down as much. The other one's, like really clamp down. So that's why there's options there for you guys to quickly just be able to switch between them. And like I said, I build those for me too, so I can have the same workflow. Tucana was a breakthrough amp for me. So good. Yeah, like I said, it's kind of like it's dirty, but it doesn't have to be. It's not like super overdriven. I have a joke with a friend of mine that like, as I'm getting older, like I'm really, really excited about like edge of breakup tones. And that's like a sign of getting old. Because it used to be just all about chugging. Chug, 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 chug. Now I'm like, frang, frang, frang. So guess I'm just getting old. What else we got here? Love my JVM, 12 channels. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's the JVM's a great amp. And honestly, you know what? This is what I'm going to do for you guys. Anybody who's gone to my website and signed up, got on the mailing list, I'm going to build a JVM like super preset where it's JVM cleans, JVM like edge of breakup, JVM dirties, JVM heavies. I'm gonna do like an Uber JVM preset, and I will send that out to whoever's on the mailing list. So if you haven't gone to my website to do so, you can do that now, and I'll do a JVM Uber super preset. I love to play around with presets, but I don't own an Axe-FX yet. Oh man, you got to get one. I mean, like I said, there's so many great tools now. I just really, I do really like the flexibility of the Axe-FX. I think sonically, ultimately, I don't think the Axe-FX has any sonic limitations. I think the only limitation sonically that you might run into is number one, knowing what to do, and number two, losing perspective. I find myself doing that. Even when I'm making presets myself, I'll completely lose perspective. And I'll be like, oh, this thing sounds amazing. And then I'll go like punch in a guitar part on a song I'm working on, and it'll just be like, holy shit, that's terrible. Because I had no context. I had no, just no, yeah, what's the word? Just have no objectivity. You just get caught in the weeds when you start tweaking a little too much. Again, that's our fault. That's not the unit's fault. The amps like limit our options, and there's only so many times you want to go and stick your head in front of that cab listening to the sound. So most of the time you just leave the mic wherever it's kind of like, that's kind of balanced. I'll keep it there. So, we're getting old in the same way. See, I don't know. It's edge of breakup. Who knew? I do. I'll hold on to all your presets for when it happens. Okay, cool. All right. Okay, so I'm going to circle back really quickly. Thank you guys for hanging in there with me. I know this has been, we're almost at 2 hours, but like I said, I can geek out on this shit all day long. So I'm just going to make a new preset really quickly here. Blank. Okay, so I'm going to build a really quick preset here and show you guys how I would build a preset. And I'm going to actually change my Axe input. I'm going to make it a stereo track. So I record all of my guitars on a stereo track, whether I'm using the Axe-FX, whether I'm using an amp, I guess if I'm using a plugin, I don't, because ultimately the plugin is on top of the DI. The DI isn't affected, right? So here I'll do. Oh, you know what? I already had this set up. Look at me. Look at me planning ahead. I never do that. It's a complete lie. I always do that. I stay up at night planning ahead. Okay, so this is. I'm going to mute that. This is my guitar track, okay? And what I do is we've got a stereo track. I don't know how every DAW works this out, but in Pro Tools, I put what's called a trim plugin on. You know, a trim plugin is a mute, a volume, and a phase. That's it. It's almost just like a channel control. And I use something called multi-mono, okay? So when you go to multi-mono, and actually, let me just do this from scratch so you guys can see it. This is a trick. I know a lot of guys who do this now, and I know this is a complete coincidence, but I'm going to say it anyways because I very rarely brag. I had been doing this for 2, maybe 3 years before I even heard anybody doing this. And then beyond that, it like exploded. Now everybody does it. So again, I'm not saying it's a novel concept, but I'm just saying this is something that for a couple of years in my brain was an original idea. I didn't rip it off from anybody. I came up with this myself. Not saying everybody else stole it from me. I'm just saying I didn't get it from anybody. I came up with it myself. So anyways, stereo track. We're going to go multi-mono, trim plugin. And there's this little button right here that's this little like link, chain link that's got that's blue. And when if you move the level, it's moving the level on both the left and the right, right? So if you switch over to that's what this L on right is, you can see that the right side also came down. So how this works, and I wish Avid would give us a different option for this. I'm actually going to talk to somebody about that. I wish there was a way in multi-mono where you could see both the left and the right at the same time, because instead of having to use this little menu. And if there is a way to do that, somebody, God, please tell me how to do that. I don't think there is. But anyways, we're going to set this back. But if you unlink it, now the left and the right operate independently. Okay? So now the left, you can go and change the level. And if you go back to the right side, it hasn't been changed. And I think most plugins, I think all plugins have a multi-mono option. So even like compressors, if let's say you're compressing room mics on drums, if you run multi-mono, the left and the right will kind of pump differently because they're almost acting as two different plugins. Whereas if you're running stereo, it will kind of pump together depending on how the plugin was designed, but a lot of them do that. So multi-mono has a lot of other uses, but I use it for what I call, I call this concept a multi-mono track. So it's a stereo track, but I don't use it for stereo. I use it for having two mono signals recorded onto the same track. Okay. So I just wanted to explain that because I'm coming in on a stereo track and I want you guys to understand kind of what's going to be happening here. All right. So let me put that on input. All right. So we're going to make this input 2 because that's where my Pro Tools is being routed to. I'm just going to turn off the noise gate there because I use a noise gate later on. And if you guys noticed, this is kind of how my Fractal Gift of Tone preset looked. So I'm going to route it all the way over to there. I'm going to go to my feedback send. Oh, and here's something that I always get screwed up on. Feedback return. The feedback return defaults to return level as 0. I can't tell you how many times I've started a new preset and been like, why the fuck aren't I hearing anything? And then it's like, oh, I got to turn that up. I know there's a reason for that because they don't want people to blow their faces off, but that's just a note. Okay, and then we are going to go all the way here. And then I'm going to put my output block. Doesn't even really matter kind of where it is, I guess. I'll put it right here. Output block. And here's what we're going to do. All right, so follow me here. If I play this should just give us a clean DI signal all the way through, okay? Okay, it's only coming out of one side, and it's smashed, right? Very loud. So here's where things get, I don't want to say a little tricky, but here's where, this is how I get my DI recorded independently of the amp sound. So I kind of think of this top row as, that's kind of like my pedal board before I plug into the DI. And then let's pretend this send is the DI box. And then this return is the through of the DI box going to the amp. Okay. And so what I do is I take the output of this DI box, quote unquote, send, and I route that to the output block here. Okay. And just for shits and giggles, so we can tell the difference between the amp and the amp and the DI. Oops. Let's put a cab on here. All right. Let's turn this down just a hair. Actually, you know what? Let's go Dynacab. Oh, here's another cool thing. Here's another cool thing I'll give to everybody if you go to my website and sign up. I've gone through and saved block libraries for every Dynacab option. So let's say the Recto Straight. Basically, it loads each of the mic options into each of the 4 slots. And so you don't have to go load those up every time. And I've done one for every one here. Okay? So it gives you a good starting point. So let's just go Recto Straight. I've been liking this dynamic too, in kind of that position. I'll go ribbon over there. I'm just eyeballing these, obviously, so bear with me. Okay. All right, so now if you go to your output block, you've got to pan that first row to the left, so that way the DI gets recorded only on the left input of Pro Tools. And then we're going to send row 1, 2, 3, 4 to the right. Okay, so here's your pan down here. Send 1 to the left, 4 to the right. And now if I play, you're going to hear the DI on the left and the amp on the right. Okay? Okay, makes sense? Now we're going to go back to Pro Tools. And now what we need to do is we need to mute that left side. So we go to left on multi-mono plugin. We're going to mute it. Okay, so now when we do that when we play that same part, you're not going to hear the DI. You're only going to hear the amp on the right side. And now you can go to the pan, and in Pro Tools, you've got independent control over the left and the right pan. And now you just use the right pan, right? So you can still pan it to the left if you want. Okay? The left doesn't do anything, because that's muted. Okay, so that's what I call a multi-mono track. And I use this same kind of philosophy, or the same type of kind of concept. I use this with kick drums. I use this with snare drums. So like a snare top and a snare bottom, I might put on the same track. And then I'd pan both the left and the right up the middle. The top's on the left, the bottom's on the right. I'll use the trim plugin. Instead of muting the left, I might go to the right, flip the phase, and bring it down a little bit. And now instead of tying up 2 tracks, you're tying up 1 track, and now you can compress and EQ and do everything, process that together. So it's kind of a cool little trick. Same with kick drums. If you got like 2 in mics, or like an in and out mic that you're kind of mixing together, same idea. You can get that balance within that. So any questions about that kind of multi-mono situation? You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to record. I'm just going to record a piece really here so you guys can, real quick here. Oh, so this is the question. If Fractal's still in the house. Is Fractal in the house? This is what I'm curious about regarding level. Okay, so sorry, I'm grabbing the wrong window here. So if we look at my DI, so I'm sending this DI, which is not even peaking, and I'm actually trimming it down even more. And then I'm going into the Fractal. It's going straight through, and it's supposed to be coming out at Unity, but it is absolutely smoking the input of Pro Tools. I don't know why that is, and I've never really figured that out. So I always have to trim down the DI on that row 1. I'll trim down row 1 on the output block. And now that DI looks... That DI, if I recorded that DI back in and lined it up to this DI, it's going to look pretty similar level-wise. So, again, I'm not sure why that is, and maybe somebody from Fractal can chime in on why that, in order to loop a DI through the Fractal, I got to trim it down by like 20 dB to get the level back into Pro Tools to be about the same. But anyways, so I'm going to record this really quickly just so you guys can see what this looks like. That's enough. So now you can see that this is on a stereo track. We're not hearing the DI, but now this always lives together. And look how easy that is to see. You can edit it. If you need to do any sort of reamping, all you have to do is the opposite. You can mute the amp and then open up the DI and route it to wherever you need to route it, or you can split the tracks into mono. But this is also great for editing because now instead of having to group a DI and an amp track, it's just on a stereo track. It's always, this is like married together now. So it's a really cool trick. Highly recommend everybody do that. I build that into all of my presets. So all of my presets are actually mono, except for I have some special effects that I don't record the DI because I would never want to reamp it, and I don't need to. It's more of an effect thing anyways. Those are stereo, but all of my presets are mono. And one of the reasons is so that way I can always record the DI separate. So, and by the way, we made this preset without really listening to anything. I just loaded up the RevGen Red 2 and I eyeballed the, two options on the Dynacab. And if somebody told me that they went and mic'd up a recto, or like a rectifier or like a Soldano or something, and that was the sound that they gave me, I'd be like, yeah, good guitar sound. Cool. So it just goes to show. So anyways, that's kind of like the concept of building that starting point. I'm just actually going to save this here. You know what I'll do? I'll start this as my, we'll call this Baseford JVM 410. This will be the start of the Uber. I'm so trying the multi-mono track. Haha. Yes, multi-mono track. I've got some ideas on how to really like make that workflow even cooler, and I'm talking to a few software developers about doing some things that could really make that whole process pretty fun. A nice way to work, at least. Do I have any questions? Do I have any comments? Any questions? We got. I think we can go for we'll go for another few minutes. Okay, keep me in the loop on that. Will do. Okay, should I? You guys want me to should I just start building a preset here? Should I just try to build one from scratch real quick and just narrate while I'm talking through it? We won't have to get too tweaky with like how it sounds, but just kind of maybe we'll do that. Let's do that. Okay. So again, right here is where my DI split is. So the reason why I put all of my effects here is if I record with a chorus pedal, if I put a phaser on, if I put a flanger on, most of the time, Stormio top up, yes, for sure. Most of the time, I want the DI to include that. So like I said, this is like back in the chop shop days where we've got a pedal board and we go into the pedal board, out of the pedal board, that goes into the splitter. Splitter goes to the amps, but I also take a DI off the splitter. So that's where my DI would come from. So if we were doing like a trem sound that was going, I want that built into the DI. I don't want that to then have to, if I'm going to reamp, go create that later. Or if somebody's doing a volume swell, or if somebody's doing a wah-wah solo, like I want that recorded with the DI. So that's why I put a lot of like my quote unquote effects up in this top row so that they get recorded with the DI. And then this bottom row, that's kind of like my amp tone row. So I do have a couple questions coming in. Are you running your model into any plug-in EQ? For example, SSEQ for that crunchy sound. No, there's nothing on here right now. This is empty. Stock as it gets. If you're talking about the tone that we're just hearing, no, that's nothing. If you're talking about like, you know, finished final productions and stuff like that, obviously, yeah, there's lots of other stuff that goes into that. But here, let's do this. Actually, I'll keep that there. Okay, what processing would you do on a pod or Rockman to get it ready for a current mix? I would do whatever it needed. So if somebody sent me, let's say somebody sent me a track recorded on a pod, and or let's say somebody sent me a session to mix, and all of the guitars were done with pods. There is not like pods have a 4.2K thing that you got to just suck out of every single patch of it. It's not like there's some inherent weird frequency that you always got to get rid of. I would say, believe it or not, like the pods, part of the thing a lot of people liked about them was actually that they kind of sounded already mixed. They didn't sound very raw. They almost sounded like I don't want to say smooth, but they sounded like a little smooth. Once you started boosting top end on the pods, things started getting a little weird, which is kind of used to be the complaint. And I think it's still a little bit of a stigma with modelers. They're like, oh, the top end's weird. The top end's weird. And I'm like, well, actually, the top end's not weird. It's just that like most guitar amps that get recorded usually don't have a lot of top end anyways. And I think ultimately something, I don't know what the capture process is. Maybe it's because it's capturing when a lot of these amps are being developed. At least I know from like when I was developing the CB4, like you're capturing the character of it by using a bunch of things, both guitar and not guitar. So sweeps and like the Kemper does, right? So I think sometimes ultimately maybe it's capturing frequencies that maybe like guitars actually don't even provide, and maybe that's why sometimes the top end can get a little weird. But ultimately, if you just treat, for instance, like if you just treat IRs and the Dynacabs and stuff like that, if you just treat that like you would a microphone. So for instance, okay, let me play this riff here and go back to Axe-Edit. Okay, so if you said to me, oh, man, there's some weird high-end thing in there. It's amp modelers. The high end, the high end is weird. This is exactly what I would do, and this would be the same thing. Like if you go put a 57 on the center of a cone on any cab, on a real amp, the fucking top end is going to be weird. It's on most amps, it's not going to be great. So most people don't put it there. Most people put it off center a little bit, or they'll angle it, or they'll like pull it off there's all these things that people do to deal with these problems in the real world, that the minute you get to an IR, everybody like, oh, somehow the technology's faulty. And I'm like, no, let's adjust the IR the way we would adjust a mic. So if I wanted to get rid of top end, I'm going to move it off of the center. Again, that kind of like dark sound, that's what a lot of guitars that I get sent to mix sound like, that were recorded like on a physical amp and a cabinet and a mic, because that hissy, especially on like rectifiers and like high gain stuff like that top end like fizzy shit, people don't like. They get rid of it they get rid of it before it even like gets recorded, which is why we never hear it. With amp modelers, we have the option of hearing that unpleasant frequency, and people sometimes get bent out of shape. All you got to do is fix the problem. So if you sent me a Rockman or a Pod recording, if it was too dark, I'd try to brighten it up. That's when things get a little weird. If it was not bright, if it was too bright and needed to kind of darken it up, or if it was kind of muddy, I mean, you just do you do the same thing with. It doesn't matter where it came from. You do whatever needs to be done. I have been using FabFilter on some problematic tones to really like notch out really annoying frequencies, and sometimes that can help. But again, you lose context really fast. You start carving out frequencies, and you're really zoned in on it, and shit can start sounding weird fast, or it starts sounding way too smooth, and the guitars just disappear in the mix. So you got to be careful with that. So how do you go about recording delays? Do you still record it in the DI channel too? Okay, good question. So I'm not sure if you guys saw, we actually, in order to make the preset work on all of the different Fractal platforms, we had to slim down some of the presets. So if you want to record, like let's say you're doing like a U2 part where like if you're just playing da 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 on the guitar and that's what your DI is, then it might be a little odd. When you want it to be right, like the delay is part of the sound, the way that the trem would. I would typically do. I would have a delay and a reverb in the DI line, and I would have a delay and a reverb in the amp line. That's one of the things. Like I duplicate an EQ. I duplicate the drive pedals, because one's being used for more of an effect and one of them's used to shape the amp sound, like the front end of the amp. And I'll duplicate, if I've got enough processing power, depending on which unit I'm on now, with the 3 Ultra Turbo, whatever I'm on, that I've got a lot of processing power. So yeah, I'll show you that really quickly. Well, let me just do this. I said I would, so let's do this. Okay, so if I was building a pedal board that I'm just going to hit before the DI, this is what I would do. I would go pitch block. And for those of you not familiar with the virtual capo in the Fractal, it basically just like adjusts your whole tuning. Like, check this out. I fucking love that block. It's really cool because you know what I can do? So this riff I played on like a standard tune Les Paul with 9 to 42 strings. And you can hear like the tuning is relatively good. And then I just drop that 4 steps and it still sounds okay. It starts getting a little warbly, but I can fix that with a little EQ and just kind of like once you double track that and the whole thing, it just starts having a sound. But I can play a really comfortable, well-intonated, well-tuned guitar in a really low tuning by using the virtual capo. So that's one of the big reasons why I put that there. So virtual capo, maybe I'll just put it down a step. Okay. And then what I'll do is so virtual capo, and I might now go through and just add. I also want to be able to do like a POG kind of thing. So I'll go do oops, no, not diatonic. Dual detune. No. I was on diatonic, wasn't I? Why am I having a brain fart? Chromatic. Thank you. So what I'll do is I'll go and do an octave down, octave up. And I'm just like, obviously I'm not listening to this. I'm just kind of setting it by ear, right? and I'll do like a 50-50. All right, we can come back and do like whammies later. The next thing I'll probably hit is I want to hit a compressor pedal next. And I'll just put that on Dynacomp for now, which I really like. Let's turn that off. And then what I'll hit is, well, here's the other thing. Sometimes, the only thing I go back and forth on a little bit is sometimes I like having the volume pedal after a drive block, so that way I can have the volume. If I'm doing volume swells, it doesn't affect the amount of gain. So, and then sometimes I find it the opposite. But in this scenario, since we're just building this from scratch and I just said it, let's do that. It's not what you guys had on the other preset, but ultimately I want. Then I'll do a volume block. So if I need to do volume swells, or if like if I'm going to have the volume controlled by MIDI to do some sort of effecty thing, put the drive there. Okay, now I'm probably going to do an EQ, graphic EQ. Then let's go and put our chorus, our flange. I love modulation effects. I know some people could probably take care of like all of their modulation in. They could probably just keep it in like 1 or 2 blocks and just have it switch between. Like for instance, like instead of doing the chorus into the flange, like you could put them like this, and just have them turn on and off to free up some space. So, you know what? Let's do that just to give you guys an idea of what that would look like. All right, so now the thing is with this, you can't run a chorus into a flange, or you can't run a flange into a phaser. These are going to run parallel, if anything. But ultimately, I probably wouldn't run them all at the same time for the most part. But let's just do this as an alternate way of building it, just to show you guys. What you'd have to do if you do it this way is you'd have to make sure you set your bypass state. Oh, why did that break? You'd have to make sure you set your bypass state on all of these to be mute, because you don't want them to be you don't want them to keep going when they're off. You don't want it to duplicate, like double up on the sound. Okay, mute out, and you also want to do that one. Mute out, mute out, mute out. So right now, if you left all 3 of these on at the same time, you'd have like triple level. So you don't want to do that. You want to set in your scenes which ones you want. It says it's going to be either chorus, flange, or phase. So this would be like if you had like a Strymon modulation pedal, or you had like a Line6, like whatever their little pedal is, where it's like you have chorus, flange, or phase. You don't have all of them at the same time, kind of thing. So somebody asked me about the capo. Ideally, would you prefer to have a properly set up low tuned guitar, maybe a baritone, or do you prefer to utilize the capo? So, right there, I've actually got a double neck Dan Electro baritone on the top, and then a regular 6-string on the bottom, and then on the other side of that stand, I've got a baritone Explorer that I will use for low stuff, but if I have a guitar that I really like the sound of, if I'm playing a part, like those strings are so thick, like it's hard to play like some of these baritones are hard to play. I mean, I'm just a baby when it comes to guitars. I love 9-42s and like but so yeah, baritones sound great, and I have them and I utilize them a lot instead of the virtual capo. But when a baritone's not working, even if it's intonated, maybe it's a part that you're trying to play. Maybe it's a fast part where it's just like the big thick strings aren't really working. Maybe it's the sound of a guitar. Maybe it's like, I've only got a couple baritones, but I've got 10 regulars. So I've got different tonal pickup options that might be better in some of the other guitars. So yeah, it's not a one or the other. It's kind of like a yes and sometimes when needed, or the other, whatever, right? So, all right, so we've got our modulation here. then let's go into, why don't we go into our trem. I love trem. I love trem pedals. And then let's go into a rotary. So again, I don't like, I might never turn the rotary on this preset ever, but it's there set up ready to go if I need it, right? Okay, and then somebody was asking about the delay and the reverb into the DI. So for instance, yeah, let's build that in right now. So let's build in a delay, and let's build in, oh, wait a minute. I don't think I can do that because I don't want those to run in parallel. Sorry, I gave you guys faulty information. This is how I'm going to do my delay and my reverb. I'll do the delay and the reverb here. I'll do my delay and reverb kind of like that, like parallel instead of in serial, but I'm going to spread these back out. Okay, flange up there. We would have troubleshooted that at the very end and been like, why isn't that working? Yep. Okay, so now we change those back to through. Bear with me. Okay, through. And then we're going down into our delay. That we're going to set the mix to 100. We'll pull back the level quite a bit. And with that, we want to be able to mute the output or mute the input, depending on what you want. If you want the delays to carry over, which, yeah, I think we probably do. We'll do the same thing there. Okay, turn that 100%. Turn the level down. Because it's mono, I'm going to put the stereo spread to 0. And then we'll keep that as mute the input when those are there. Okay. All right. Make sure you save often. Okay. We'll make those all bypassed for now. Okay. Now we're going to come down to the amp section here. So like I said, I like to have a few things kind of set up ready to go in regards to like the amp. So I like having a drive in front of the amp that you can use again for mainly kind of like shaping the tone of the amp, like just pushing the amp a certain way. That's a different sound than a distortion on like a clean sound, right? I also like to use another GEQ in front of the amp, so that way we can use that to drive it as well. Okay, we'll put that. And then the other thing that's kind of a cool trick that I don't know if you guys picked up on is instead of using the gate that's on the input block, I like using the gate after the amp block, before the cabinet block, but I have the sidechain source look at the input. So it's gating after the distortion, but it's looking at the signal at the very beginning input to determine when it's going to open and when it's going to close. So it's kind of a cool trick that some like metal guitar players used to do back in the day. Instead of putting like a noise gate in front of their amp, and then the problem would be that like the sound, it would kind of like make the distortion as the gate would come in and out, it would make the distortion kind of like phase in and out, and it wouldn't give it that choppy distortion sound, like that tight distortion sound. So what they would do is they would run the noise gate in the effects loop of the amp. So it's post preamp before the power amp, but then trigger it from the input. So that's kind of that's the idea of that. And I typically like a pretty quick attack time, and this you just got to kind of massage massage for whatever guitars you got. But I'm going to have to set this to input 2. That's right. Yeah, it's fine for now. Okay. And then we were talking about putting a... Fractal says that if you put a delay or reverb in front of the cab versus after the cab, that it literally nulls out just the way that the whole thing works. So I don't know if that's really necessary where you put that, but I usually put them before the cab, just knowing that I always have the option of, once I capture this signal, I always have the option of putting more reverbs and delays like in the box or like on the console or something like that, like outside of the Fractal. So, okay, so I'm going to put my PEQ here. That will be there to carve out any bullshit that we don't need. And then, like I said, I'm going to put my delay. I'll do my delay 2 here. And this, you're not going to set at 100 mix. This you're going to set at a lower mix because it's obviously in line here. And we'll do a reverb 2 here as well. And then there's an empty spot here if you want to put another effect in, or here for, like I said, like this is kind of my simulating a console EQ before I would print it to Pro Tools in the old days. And then I've got a couple extra things. If I wanted to put another volume option for controlling volume post everything, so that way I could really swell in and everything stays the same. You could do a synth here. You could do an enhancer block if you're running stereo. Like there's a ton of things you could do here. Trying to think if there's any other blocks that I use. I'm not really using a lot of these other ones. I mean, you could use a filter block in front of the amp if you wanted. So I used to use that instead of the GEQ. So, we can put that in here. Again, just to clean up signal, or you could, what the filter block is sometimes good for is if you want to use the same preset for guitars with like very different tonal characteristics of the pickups, you could use a filter block to get rid of, let's say, a humbucker. You can get rid of some lows, or for a single coil, you can kind of adjust some of the highs and kind of just level out some of those pickup differentials and save those based off of, and like select the filter based off of which guitar you've got plugged in. So let's put a filter block in there just so it's in there. And let's see what else there is. Anything else we can put in? Vocoder I've never used in my life. Well, at least on a guitar box. I'm definitely not one of those like Plex delay guys. I like the cumulus reverbs, but the Plex delay is cool for like effecty stuff. So you could always put that in one of these empty slots. So I guess what I'm saying is you've got a couple empty slots here that if you do want to put some stuff at like some effecty thing later down the road, you can. Okay, so there's one other thing I want to show you, and this is, I think this is only an Axe-FX thing. I don't think all of the I don't know if the floorboards have this, but basically the way that I get eight channels or 8 amps is by using 2 amp blocks. I kind of touched on this earlier, and then like I said, each amp has 4 options, right? So then we mult it off there, we split it back, and then you got to make sure you set the bypass mode to mute, so that way when one's off, the DI signal's not coming through. So, okay, so when you make those like mute changes on your first channel, the first thing I'm going to do is just go and copy that to all the current channel, or sorry, to copy the current channel to all channels. And that way, when I switch, I don't have to do that same move again. So if I go to this one, if I didn't do that, now when I go to channel B, it changes. Oh, sorry, guys, you can't see this. Sorry. Everybody's asleep. Everybody's asleep at the wheel. I'm asleep at the wheel. So what I was saying is you adjust the parameters of what happens when it's in bypass. You want it to mute. And if you don't save that current channel to all the other channels, you're going to go and tweak channel A, right? Get it the way you want. And then you're going to switch to channel B. And you're not going to remember to change those back. And so that's why you do that at first. You get kind of your overall, like, kind of global settings for that block dialed in, and then copy it to all channels. So the other thing is we're going to do that exact same thing for the cab block, and the cab block has the mute option right there. We're going to add in a second cab, so that way we can have 8 different cabs if we want. We don't need to. If we're going to treat this like it's 1 amp, like a JVM 410, and we just have it plugged into 1 cab, we probably won't need this. But like I said, I always like to build it out, and then we can always just not turn it on. Simple as that. Okay, so copy that down. Okay, let's go to the Dynacab. Let's pull up the 1960 TV cab. Now left and mute. We'll copy that to all the channels. All right, and we'll mute one of them. All right, so now what you could do is you could just literally start going through and selecting. So we're just going to go JVM, start loading it up. Where's our JVM? Okay, so we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 JVM options. Okay. And what I like to do is I actually like to use the green channel and then just have a really clean version, and then have a little bit of a slightly pushed version. So I think that's probably what we'll do. Is we'll do two options for the green, and then you guys can tweak this the way you want. You might want 1 for the green, and you might want to duplicate the reds or whatever. But let's do this. Okay, so JVM OD1 green we're going to put in there in A. We'll do the same thing for there. We'll just set them differently. Do the JVM OD1 orange there. And we will do JVM OD1 red. Okay, and we'll save that. Now we're going to go check the other amp block, and we're going to do the OD2s. JVM OD2 green. We're going to do that on channel B as well, and we'll just tweak them slightly differently. Come on, where are you? Okay, we've got the orange. And finally, we've got our red. Okay. Okay, so here's what we are going to do. We're going to not worry about cabinet B for a second. We're just going to deal with cabinet A. We're going to go and save before we go any further, because this is the thing that can get a little confusing. We've got multiple amp blocks, we've got multiple channels, and we've got multiple scenes. What I want to do is I want my scenes to be something along the lines of this. So we're going to go JVM 410. Oh, we'll just call it JVM. We don't need to save for JVM 410. So we'll do JVM OD1 green. ODM green. And I do a plus for like a slightly more driven, as you guys have probably seen on my preset. We're just going to type these in and name them now, and then we're going to go and save them that way. Okay, so now, oh, no, we didn't do orange plus. We did red. I'm asleep at the wheel. Okay, JVM, OD2, green. Let's copy that. Save that. Plus, let's go orange. And let's go red. Okay, save. Okay, so now what we have to do is we have to go and make sure that for each of those scenes, so right now we're on scene 1. So right now we want amp A on channel A. So let's go to scene 1. We're going to save that, okay? Now, kind of like we did with the channels where we're going to save that to everything, we want to do that with the scenes as well, because if we switch to scene 2, all of the effects are probably going to turn on. So let's copy this to all. Copying. Do a save. Okay, so now we're going to go to amp A, channel B. That's going to be our OD1 green plus. Oh, I almost made the cardinal sin. You got to want to switch the scene before you start tweaking. Okay, so now we're going to switch that to B. Save. Go to 3. C. Save. Go to 4. D. Save. And I'm doing all these saves. Probably you can go change them all, and then you can save once after the end. My problem is I've done this enough to where I know I'll forget to save at some point, and then something happens. So I'm always hitting save on this. Okay, so now what we want to do is we want to go to scene 5, turn off OD1, which is amp A, turn on amp B, go to channel A, okay, and now we're good to go. And now what we're going to do is we're going to save that. We're going to save that scene. We're going to copy that to 6. We're going to copy that to 7. And we're going to copy that to 8. Okay, now we'll go to 6. 6 is going to be plus, so we're good there. Green we're going to leave. 7 is going to be, oops, sorry. I made a mistake there. 6 is going to be B. Save. 7 is going to be C. Save. 8 is going to be D. Save. All right. Okay. Now, now let's run our riff. And I'm just going to click on the scenes and watch right here. You'll see which amps are active and which amps are not. Oh, by the way, I'm going to go and well, we'll do that after. Okay. All right, here we go. Ready? Start on OD1 green. This is the plus. Orange. Bottom one. Okay. You can use the down mixer plugin in Pro Tools to do what you're doing with the trim plugin, but it makes it a mono track, much easier to deal with. Huh. Interesting. The down mixer plugin. Okay. Jordan, reach out to me on Instagram. I'd definitely love to figure out how that it makes it on. It puts it on a mono track. Huh. Okay. I like that idea. Okay, so now what you would do, now you've basically got an 8-channel amp. You know, you've got your JVM. We've made the duplicate of the green. You could even duplicate the red and make one like a lead. Obviously, everything's just stock settings, so it's not necessarily sounding that great yet. But then what we would probably want to do is the thing that I would do next is once I got my gain profiles, once I have my gain profiles kind of set up, I'd go and start we talked about earlier how important that IR is. And so I would probably go straight to the Dynacab and start tweaking that to get my game, to get the overall sound the way I want. So let's just do that real quick. Okay, and one more little extra tip that I think some people don't dig into enough. Oh, hang on 1 second here. On the amp block, you've got an output EQ here, which is a really powerful, graphic EQ. So what I like to do is I like to put that right before the power amp, so it's almost like an EQ that would be in the loop, the effects loop of an amp. And if there's any frequencies that are just a little kind of like annoying, this is a way to fine tune just about any amp model. So let me play this. I'm just going to fine tune this one just a little bit here. So there's that's a little scratchy for me, so I'd probably just start kind of going in and refining maybe the cab settings to clean that up a little bit. But it doesn't take long to get a sound where, again, not trying to compare apples to oranges, but if you were going to go and mic up a cabinet or set up a guitar cabinet and an amp, like, we've already done so much to get so far so quickly, and now whether or not we get this all the way to a 10 out of 10 is up to us. We have all the tools in this box that we need to do it. So, and same with like a lot of the plugins. Okay, man, what a marathon. You guys have stuck with me. I'm getting tired. I know you guys probably are too. Let's do a round of Q&A here. Man, there's some stuff we didn't even get to today. I can't believe it. I could probably do a part 2 on this maybe in the new year, but let's do a round of Q&A. Let's tee them up. What do you guys got for me? I'm going to shut that down. Okay. This was fun. This was fun. I'm waiting for Jordan. He's going to tell me this down mixer, the down mixer plugin, because I'm going to check that out. Let's just do this again tomorrow. Oh, man. Probably could pick up where I left off. There's a whole, like, we didn't even scratch the surface on impulse responses. We didn't really scratch the surface on kind of what a DI, like how your DI is captured can make a difference. Like, I already know, even just hearing that preset, like that, I was probably hitting the DI too hard. There's a lot of things like what DI are you using? What's the level? There's ways that you can figure out ways when you're doing reamping to kind of figure out like what that level should be. It's something as simple as plugging a guitar into an amp or into the plugin and hitting the chord and then playing the DI. And even if it's not the same guitar, just being like, oh, okay, that's how loud the DI should be. It shouldn't be just demolishing the front end of the amp or the plugin or the Fractal or whatever. So, yeah. So, yeah, we still got IRs, DIs, capturing DIs, the reamping. I'm just looking at my notes here. The one thing that I just, well, we don't have to get into this either, but the thing that I've been noticing a lot lately, because there's so many plugins now, the way that the knobs work on the models, the emulations, not so much on the fractals. They're very open and honest about like how that works. If you look at like the manual, or like they've got their Wikipedia page with all the amp models, and they talk about the controls, they'll say that, the bass knob wasn't mapped exactly the same way, or they'll say the presence knob was actually mapped exactly the same way. They kind of talk about that, but a lot of the plugins, the controls don't really line up to the way that they're supposed to. And having been involved, obviously, with the development of the CB4, like, I have a little insight as to how a lot of developers do that. And the quick and easy way is to literally just scale it from like 0 to 10. And I think a lot of them do that. So that's the other thing, is like lining, like almost forget about like where the knobs are set up, where they look, and go for that. So, okay, down mixer. Yes. I'll check that out. I'm recording live off the floor, 3 bands this weekend. So let's pick up same time next week. Perfect. Yep. Have I used the Axe-FX on any records you can name? Yeah, but I mean, pretty much anything in my discography for the last 10 years. The last Nickelback album, like San Quentin, was a combination of Fractal and the CB4 plugin. So I think there were like 4 rhythm guitar tracks, and 2 of them were Rectifier. I think like the Recto 2 Red. Oh, which one is it? Let me look. I'll tell you exactly which model it was. Yeah, Recto 2 Red Modern. Was like the main heavy sound on a lot of the last Nickelback album, and then the CB4, which is basically like Diesel VH4. Again, a big component though is like the IR, and the IR is a kind of like a custom amalgamation of a few different things that I've kind of come across and mixed. Maybe I'll give that away one day. But yeah, no, I use the Axe-FX. Here's the thing. The Axe-FX for me is not like, we don't have time or we don't have money or we don't have this to do amps. It's kind of like, if it sounds good, we don't need amps. If the guitar player isn't sensitive to the latency of going, to Fractal's not that bad, like the plugins. If they want to, if the guitar player's just, the mind is a powerful thing, right? So if a guitar player already has a preconceived notion that the Fractal or a plugin isn't as good, it's very hard to change their minds, especially when you want them to perform and you want them to play and you don't want them thinking about that kind of shit. So the one thing I said we were going to talk about, we never got a chance to, was like, well, what's the benefit of having real amps? Why do I still own tens of thousands of dollars of real amps? Because they're, like I said, they're cool to look at. I like the smell of tubes. And there's an experience for, if a young band who just gets a record deal hires me to produce an album and they go into a studio and there's a stack of amps that they have only dreamt about owning sitting there for them to use. That's a different experience than them coming in and plugging into a DI and me like turning on my CB4 plugin. Even if what comes out of the speakers is exactly the same, like theoretically, the experience is very different. So there's still a place for amps, and ultimately, but when I'm working on projects, I have to make that decision. Not necessarily all the time early, but with Nickelback, it's a no-brainer because we record as we write. So it's one of those scenarios, like I said, like we might write a verse and a chorus and then come back and punch in the third chord of the chorus 4 months later. And so being able to save a preset and having come back exactly the same, and I write in the comments section which preset it was, I write what guitar we used, I wrote what pickup it was, like I keep that all in the comments section so we can get back to that very, very quickly. If I'm working with a band and we're, they're flying in from Florida and I have them for a week and we're recording the whole record, doing guitars, and they want the experience, whatever, yeah, I'd probably set up amps. I'd have the Fractal setup running next to it, and I might turn on the CB4 if I don't have my Diesel. Like, there's just a balancing act, right? Everything's a little bit of a compromise. And so you have to, as a producer, it's our jobs to determine kind of what's the priority, what's the most important thing. Some guitar players, they're like, I don't give a fuck what we plug into. It sounds rad. Like, let's roll. Cool. Well, then I would rather not spend the time setting up all the amps and then taking the chance that a mic gets bumped or the tubes are bad and all that shit. I'd rather not do that. And I would rather spend that time working on the parts, working on performances, experimenting with different parts, experimenting with different sounds in let's say the Fractal. And ultimately that's what I've determined the priority for that particular project is. There are some projects that might be the complete opposite. It might be like the priority is like, I want to make this like 19-year-old kid feel like he's a rock star. So I want to have $30,000 of the best boutique amps sitting right in front of him while he's tracking. And that's going to be more inspiring for him to play. And that's going to get me as a producer the best result, as opposed to, pulling up guitar rig, even though it still sounds good. So you're going to have to do this all over again. But for bass, oh, fuck no. Bass is super easy for me. I got like 3 bass sounds and that's it. Any quick recommendations for getting the cleanest possible DI? I have only recorded direct into an audio interface. No frame of reference. Sorry, reading that. No frame of reference for how much hum noise should be expected for humbuckers. This is where you get into a little bit of a little. This is where things can get a little. There can be discrepancies. I will say, if you're amp modeling, if you're using an amp modeler, like a plug-in amp modeler, the DI that you use, the level that you have set, all of that stuff can make a big difference. Certain plugins are way more sensitive to others. Others have the way that they kind of normalize the signal or treat the signal. It kind of just like negates the differences between DIs. But yeah, I would much rather go in not even coming close to distorting or peaking. Always leave yourself lots of headroom. You can always turn it up. Obviously, just finding a quiet spot in the room, even sometimes turning the other way, can make the guitar be a lot more quiet. And if you're in a scenario where, you know, if you're using a really cheap interface, and I don't mean cheap by like cheaply made, I'm just like cheap price. It's cheap in price because they had to skimp on components, and sometimes the DIs and the converters and the mic pre's are sometimes kind of the things they skimp on in order to get you headphone amps and more inputs or more outputs or whatever else. So I would don't just assume buying something more expensive is going to be better. But if there's a way to test that, maybe go test a couple interfaces. If you've got a digital input, like I know I use the Fractal DI, even if I'm not using the Fractal. If I'm using the CB4, I'll go through the Fractal and then go into Pro Tools digitally. So that way I'm using the Fractal's clean DI and going into Pro Tools digitally. So there's a few different ways, but those are a couple options. So keep on looking down at the comments. I should be looking at you guys. Hi. Anything else before we pack it in on this beautiful Friday evening? You guys have been absolute troopers. We've been on for 3 hours talking about amp modelers. I absolutely love this world we live in. Yeah, if we were having this conversation like 15 years ago, it probably would only been like a half hour and everybody would be like, yeah, whatever, man, pods suck. Now we're talking about how awesome fractals are. It's pretty cool. Okay. All right. Well, thank you again. I appreciate it. If you don't already have the Gift of Tone plugin from Fractal, go to their website, fractalaudio.com. Grab that. Go to my website, please. Join the mailing list. And like I said, I'm going to start slowly, but I will start ramping up, sending out. Like I said, I'll work on this preset probably next week, and as I kind of tweak it and get it sounding good, I'll send it out to you guys. And yeah, please subscribe, hit the like button, share, do all that fun stuff. And then yeah, we'll pick this up probably after the new year. So we're gonna have a couple weeks break. So happy holidays, everybody. Happy New Year. Everybody be safe. Hope you and your family are all happy and healthy. And until next time, we will keep jamming guitars, man. Keep making awesome guitar tones. Doesn't matter how you get there, as long as you get there. All right. We'll talk later. Thank you.